Okay. All right. I'm David Wilcock, and we are here with another live stream. We have a very interesting show for you today, and I really am excited about being here with you and getting the opportunity to speak to you once again. It's kind of amazing I still have a channel, but I'm also going to only focus here on content that will keep the channel preserved. So, today's subject is the Great Pyramid, and it's a very intriguing monument, and as you're probably aware, I was involved in many of the seasons of Ancient Aliens, over 100 episodes, and it did become the #1 show on History Channel. And apparently, according to things I heard from the staff at Prometheus Entertainment, it is the #1 most viewed show in countries like India and Bangladesh and many of the South American countries. Ancient Aliens is the show people watch the most. They were spending a lot on each episode. It was really good production value. And the basic hypothesis of that show, that I was starring in it since, I don't know, 2010, something like that. The basic hypothesis is that we have extraterrestrial lineage, that we are, in fact, not all natives to this planet, or at least the monuments on this planet are not native to the planet. Ancient Aliens didn't always speculate as to whether any of those people stayed here or whether they are somehow related to people on Earth. But what I want to do today is really unpack the Great Pyramid. Because even if you are very, very familiar with the kind of stuff that's going on here, you probably haven't seen any of this information on the Great Pyramid before. If you watch my stuff, you probably have. But what I'm going to do is express to you how the Great Pyramid is completely impossible to have been built by any normal human beings. Even if we tried to do it now, we would be greatly, greatly hampered in our ability. There is no reasonable way to replicate what the Great Pyramid is or what the Great Pyramid looks like today with any of our conventional technology. We're dealing with incredibly, incredibly heavy blocks of stone. And for so long, the conventional viewpoint has been that this is all part of the work of primitives who, in some of the various iterations of this, they built stone ramps to go up to the pyramid so they could roll the blocks up, but there's no evidence of those stone ramps ever having existed. Or they will also say that the stone ramps were augmented with logs that were slathered in butter, and a bunch of slaves that just pushed these stones up the ramps on these buttery logs. This is completely, completely insane. And there is absolutely no way to stage a reenactment where people could move these giant blocks and actually get anything to happen out of it. So, going over, what I'm saying to you is fundamentally, oh, notice I got an American flag. You like that? You like that? Yeah, we kind of played around with the cameras, set up a few more, because you know what? Camera angles are awesome. So if I have them, it's like smoke them if you got them. So that's what we're doing here. Anyway, the Great Pyramid is the key that we need to focus on now in the advent of disclosure that is expected now to be coming sometime in June. The June 1st date may not happen. In fact, we've been told not to expect that it will happen. It may be more towards the middle or the end of the month. And again, the best laid plans always get thrown off by the heat of battle. So we don't really know what's going to be happening in June. We don't really know if this disclosure will even take place or not. But I do believe that it's going to be quite amazing. We're starting to hear that the wars on the inside of what's going to get disclosed, what's not going to get disclosed, is now trending in favor of that they will announce some degree of extraterrestrials at this point. Probably not going to go with the idea that everything is unknown. We don't know whether this is extraterrestrial. We don't know whether this is from Russia. We are also seeing that there is going to be an effort made to try to impugn the people who have been covering this up, that there may be some sort of statements to the effect that this is like a new 9/11, in terms of how inept the government has been in not addressing this so-called threat. Okay? So it's very important to understand that we're not being threatened. It's very important to understand that there are predominantly positive beings out there in the universe who are guiding and protecting us, who have our highest and best interests in mind, and who actually are loving beings. Now, Collective Evolution recently wrote an article about all this, and I really support their work. And they were saying, let's try to not polarize extraterrestrials into just angels or demons. And I wouldn't say that either. However, if you study the literature to the depth and the extent that I have, it becomes very clear that we are dealing with beings that are, in some cases, spiritually inclined and appear to be the source of many, if not most, of the world's ancient spiritual traditions. And the reason I point this out to you once again is my ongoing emphasis of the work of Giorgio de Santillana and Hertha von der Schend in their epic classic of historical research called Hamlet's Mill. Now, Hamlet's Mill is a book that was profiled by Graham Hancock in his epic classic Fingerprints of the Gods, which was released in 1996. That book had an extremely transformative effect upon me and upon the research I was doing at the time, because Graham Hancock had tied together information that I had been seeing in hundreds of books. I actually read somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 to 400 books while I was in college on the subject of UFOs, paranormal, Bigfoot, anything and everything having to do with UFOs, ancient civilizations, giant stone monuments, etc. When you bring in Graham Hancock's Fingerprints of the Gods, he had many of the things I'd already seen, but then he also focused on Hamlet's Mill. So these two historians, Giorgio de Santillana and Hertha von der Schend, had a unified theory of history in which they're looking at historical written traditions from all over the world. And let's also remember that at the very least, these mythologies were coming from at least some sort of visionary state that the person was getting, whether it was in a trance, whether it was in a dream. And also it appears in the case of the foundation of Islam, the foundation of Christianity, the foundation of Judaism, all of the Abrahamic religions at least, that there were very definitely in-person contacts taking place in these cases. Muhammad said that he was being greeted by Archangel Gabriel, and Archangel Gabriel was described as a human-like being that was interacting with him. So there's some very, very intriguing things in Islam that correlate with these other 23 ancient spiritual traditions. So I don't think that it's important for us to try to focus on just one religion, because unlike what is going around in the Christian community for the most part, this idea of a dimensional shift or rapture is greatly enhanced and greatly strengthened when we bring in the corollary data from other types of information. When we start to bring in the data that suggests that these traditions were inspired by real extraterrestrials, that's the only explanation that really fits for why Santillana and von der Schend found such bizarre information. Think about it this way. Let's go over to the, 5. Think about it this way. Without this tradition, where would we be spiritually? How many people would still be trying to be the best person they could if we didn't have beings like Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, Krishna, Moses? If these beings weren't showing up and having these incredible experiences, and then if their writings were not transformed into something that we could use, where do we go? We might not have a planet that was anywhere near as positive or spiritual as what we got. Now, you could say, yeah, David, Earth is in a lot of trouble, and I'm not really that happy about what's going on right now. These 23 ancient traditions were specifically written to speak to us today. They were not written for the past. They were essentially time capsules. They were essentially encoded information that is relevant to what's happening right now, here and today. So isn't it interesting, after all these years of human history in modern times, that we are only now getting some sort of formal acknowledgement that disclosure is real, that there is a UFO disclosure to be had, and we're being told to expect something. So for me, this is like being a kid on Christmas. I'm excited to open my presents. I can't wait to see what they're going to say. And I also don't want to disrespect them either. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's hope that this is going to be really awesome. Let's hope that we get the declassification of advanced patents, which we've been promised. And let's hope that we actually can use this as leverage to create a more healthy and evolved society. I do believe that we're going to have to accept that the only way that all of the different spiritual traditions around the world could be seeded with the same information is that the same extraterrestrials are going to be telling us about in June with their wreckage, and they're going to be acknowledging that there was crash retrievals and downed wreckage, okay? We can do all this now. We can start to connect the pieces. We don't have to wait for a government to tell us what is true. So, what did these 23 ancient traditions actually say? How did these two historians figure this all out and make this thing into something that is interesting and powerful and real for us here on Earth? How did they do it? Well, what they did is they started to identify certain weird codes inside these ancient prophecies. So, for example, all around the world, you have certain specific numbers that show up in these ancient spiritual traditions. Numbers like 72, 360, 2,160, 25,920 even, in the way that you add things up. One of the most convenient mathematical tricks, of course, is 360 times 72. And in fact, if you look up at the Capitol Rotunda, you can take the 72 stars around the rotunda. When you're looking up in the U.S. Capitol where Congress is, you look up at the ceiling, there's a mural up there of George Washington on a rainbow, which seems to be indicative of him achieving rainbow body. Remember that the Founding Fathers called themselves perfectibilists. They believed that their goal was to perfect their bodies and to perfect their country, to be in line with this ascension. And of course, what do we see on the obverse side of the Great Seal of the United States? On every dollar bill, we see a pyramid. And we see a very unique pyramid where the capstone is an all-seeing eye. And this has haunted and created all kinds of mysteries for people for many, many decades since this became part of the U.S. dollar bill in the early 20th century. I believe it was around 1934 that they started using it. I could be wrong. It could be earlier. Anyway, the point is, now we have a through line where in modern times we look at this particular number, 25,920. We're looking at it as a number of years, okay? And that number, as you probably already know, corresponds to a wobble in the Earth's axis. So this wobble in the Earth's axis, imagine that the Earth is tilting like this, okay? It's tilted on its side, a little bit like this. But then it's rotating this way. So let's say the whole Earth is spinning like this. But then at the same time, the conventional view is that the Earth's axis, let's see if I can do this right, because I have to do everything backwards. Okay? The Earth's axis, they believe, is going like this, in the opposite direction. And so one spin of the Earth's axis like this is supposed to take 25,920 years. And how do we measure this? As I've said in many other talks, you can look at the position of the sun at the equinox, and you can see where that position will be, where the sun is rising on the horizon. You can also at night look at the stars, and that's called, well, when it's coming to pyramids and so forth, aligning with them, they call it archaeoastronomy. When you look at archaeoastronomy, now you're seeing that these objects that were built are aligned to certain stars. And of course, the infamous one that everybody knows about now was popularized by Robert Bauval, where he created a very decisive alignment between the three pyramids in the constellation, the the three stars in the constellation Orion, and the three pyramids in the belt of I can't talk. The three stars in the belt of the constellation of Orion are identical in their size, position, and overall layout to the three pyramids on Giza Plateau. Then there are other pyramids that also correspond perfectly with where other stars in the constellation Orion would be, and where the Milky Way is in proportion to the constellation Orion, you have the Nile River. So these coincidences are not anything other than an alignment that is supposed to be seen and supposed to be deciphered. It's very strange that you have two large pyramids and one smaller one right next to it. In fact, let me just zip ahead a little bit so I can show you what I'm talking about here, so you can see this. All right, so looking at it from the top view here in the slide, you can see the three pyramids, and you can see that there are two that are larger and there is one that is smaller. Also, we know that the Great Pyramid has these internal passageways that are very fascinating. There's an ascending passage, a descending passage. We're going to go a lot more into this as time goes on. But here again is a view of the three pyramids, the three big pyramids, and then of course there are also three tiny pyramids below it. Here's another gorgeous, gorgeous shot of the pyramid. Now, notice that the second pyramid, not the Great Pyramid itself, but the second pyramid is actually, it's actually got a capstone on the top still. And so, what's going on with that? Why does the second pyramid have these extra stones up at the top? Well, those are called casing stones. And the casing stones used to cover the entire pyramid, and they also covered the Great Pyramid. We're going to get into that in just a minute. But the point is, as you're looking at these images, I'll show you another one here. These three pyramids are very oddly positioned relative to one another, and you have the Sphinx nearby. This is looking at it from, actually, this is just a mirror image of the same kind of angle that you see here. And of course, we have a great deal of interest in the capstone and the idea of the return of the capstone after it has been so prominently profiled on the US dollar itself. So what is really going on here about this Giza alignment? If the pyramids are aligned with the constellation Orion, then how does that relate to this 26,000 year cycle that we were just talking about? Well, this is another thing that Graham Hancock covered extensively in his book, and the idea being that when you look at the actual alignment of the stars in the constellation Orion with the pyramids here on Earth, the 26,000 year cycle causes that alignment to drift in and out. So you're only going to really get one or two times in the entire cycle where the pyramid is actually in proper alignment with what you see on the ground, because then in Giza, it's tilting, right? The stars are tilting in the sky, so the constellation of Orion is going to be tilting like this, and so you have to get it when everything is lined up. That's what happens approximately 11,450 years ago. And so the Giza alignment discovered by Robert Bauval encodes a period of time that appears to be 11,450 years ago. Now, when I was reading Fingerprints of the Gods by Graham Hancock, I was further amazed by the idea that the Great Pyramid has the Sphinx rising on the horizon where the sunrise is 11,450 years ago. And in the ages of the zodiac, these 2,160 year intervals of time, we are in the age of Leo in 11,450 BC. The age of Leo is the lion. The lion is like the Sphinx, and the Sphinx is on the horizon. So does this suggest that there was actually a reason for why the Sphinx was put there that helps to further encode the time of when it was constructed? The answer is yes. All of these things are very, very fascinating because they interlink together to suggest that the Great Pyramid has its roots in severe antiquity, so far back in time that the only realistic assessment we have of any advanced civilization from that time would be these historical records put down by Plato in the Timaeus and Critias regarding this concept of the Atlantean civilization. Plato is the one who got notes from the wisest man in Greece, Solon, who was actually able to infiltrate the Egyptian priesthood, to get himself in there, and to then be able to visually see all of the records. I'm sure they showed him a lot of great stuff, because we now know the Library of Alexandria was stolen and relocated into the Vatican Library. Now, they wouldn't say it's stolen. They would say it was protected. But the point is, according to at least 2 different insiders I've spoken to, the Vatican Library has an incredible number of books that the Egyptians had found that are books from an off-planet civilization. Off-planet civilization that actually traveled here from Mars. Their planet was destroyed. They traveled to the Earth, and they set up civilization here. So they apparently have books in the Vatican that include images of things like spaceships and space stations and blueprints on how to make them. They include pages of a material that is apparently almost completely indestructible. You can't rip it. Some of the books actually, believe it or not, had all digital information, where all the pages have is some kind of very advanced and sophisticated barcodes on them. Whether you would scan it with some device you have, we don't really know. But suffice it to say that if we do get a full, honest disclosure, it must include the fact that humans are not indigenous to Earth, that at least some of the humans on Earth migrated here from somewhere else, and this appears to be the solution to the elongated skull mystery. Now, you've probably noticed that a lot of these Cabal folks like to take credit for the elongated skulls and say that this is their lineage. In fact, we've been hearing for many years now that the final disclosure plan for the deep state, or whatever you want to call it, is to link themselves to these extraterrestrial immigrants. And then the story gets a lot weirder when you realize that in a full disclosure event, we're going to hear about the fact that there are at least 3 major spaceships that were found underneath the ice in Antarctica. And at least one of them is a massive mothership that's over a mile long. I've heard about this from a lot of different people. And just to recap on this, the ship is so large that it actually is a mothership, the big one, and it has these little trays on it. And the trays hold smaller UFO-type aircraft. When we look at those UFO-type aircraft, they appear identical or almost identical to the Tibetan notion of the stupas. And of course, if I had thought of all this before I started talking, I would have all slides for you to show this. But go look up the Tibetan stupa, and you will see an example of what these craft look like inside the mothership. It's the same. Well, the Tibetans, of course, have some very, very interesting records. Apparently, the Germans went over there and acquired technology and books that helped them to understand how to build these vimanas. Because remember, the Tibetans were migrants. They migrated from India up into the mountains to escape persecution. And what started Tibetan Buddhism was essentially a modification of different types of Buddhism, such as Vajrayana Buddhism. So all of these 23 different ancient cultures, that includes Buddhism, that includes Tibetan culture, they all have weird mathematical encodings of this precession of the equinoxes. That's the big surprise. Why do all of these indigenous cultures, who definitely should not have been able to calculate a 25,920-year drift in the stars in the sky and understand what that was, they're supposedly savages, why did they all get very sophisticated mythology where it deftly weaves in these precessional numbers into something that you normally wouldn't even think would... why would they care? Why would there need to be 72 of these and 2,160 of these and that kind of stuff? And that's just some of it. Honestly, to even try to summarize Santayana and Deschaines' scholarship in a short period of time is futile. There's so many different things that these ancient traditions teach. But I want to be very clear with you right now that most, if not almost all of them, agree on what happens at the end. You can be all excited about the 25,000 years and say, wow, David, it's amazing, the stars are moving through the sky. Nobody really cares, right? It's like, big deal. Okay, yeah, that's pretty cool if the Great Pyramid's 11,450 BC is when it was built. That makes it like over 13,000 years old, because you got to add 2,000 years on after BC, right? So, is there something else to this? The ancient religious prophecies say that at the end of the cycle there is some sort of solar event. And some of them describe this in very weird encrypted metaphor. There's a metaphor, for example, of horsemen that are riding around in circles, and then eventually the horses in this case are actually grinding a mill. So this is another one of the strange things Santayana and Van de Shen talk about. And again, I don't have any slides for this, I apologize. There's been so much amazing stuff going on this week. Plus we wanted to get this multi-camera shoot going on, where we can get you from close-up, or we can go over here and do a wider shot. I'm very happy about that. I also wanted to get Old Glory put in the frame. This is a very good time to be supportive of the United States and of what we're trying to accomplish here. So, again, these ancient prophecies talk about a mill for grinding grain. And that's why the book's called Hamlet's Mill. So just bear with me for a second as I explain this without visuals. The basic idea is that we have this cycle of time that we're all going through, and it is related to a wobble in the Earth's axis. So the way that ancient cultures used to make any type of baked goods is that they have to grow wheat, and if you've ever seen wheat, it grows up to about the height of your knees, not too much more. It never gets that tall, and it has these very large seed heads on the top. The seed heads have seeds inside of them which are called wheat berries, as you may know. How do you get those wheat berries out, and how do you turn them into usable food? Well, what you do is you take the wheat berries, you cut the wheat berries off, you dry them out, and then you throw them into a big bowl, a big round bowl, okay? And then you have a millstone, and you have the millstone inside the bowl, so there's a channel that the millstone is supposed to grind around in a circle, you see. And then as you grind the millstone around in a circle, here's the really beautiful thing about the wheat grain. You can separate the ground wheat berry flour from the stalk and the hard material that's surrounding the wheat berries. And that stalk and hard material doesn't actually turn into a fine powder. It stays as long, thin pieces, and that's the chaff. So if you've ever heard the word chaff, that's where it comes from. So you have to kind of blow on it and get all the chaff out. And when you blow on it, all the chaff is very light and it all floats away, but what's left is this powder at the bottom, and that's your wheat flour, okay? So each of these ancient cultures seem to have been given this technology of how to grow grain and how to store it so that they are protected from famine as a result of their contact with benevolent human extraterrestrials. That is one of the basic things we can assume that is talked about in Hamlet's Mill. In other words, up until the time that these benevolent ETs started to contact us and give us these fascinating in-person contact experiences that led to mythology, that led to these written records that are extremely amazing being made, up until that time we were hunter-gatherers. And so all we knew how to do is to hunt animals in the wild and to gather berries and fruits and things that were already growing. We really didn't even understand about planting seeds and cultivating our own crops. We didn't understand about keeping animals in some sort of farm instead of them just being free range and having to find them. All of this type of like agricultural knowledge came from these higher beings. The higher beings also gave us architecture. They taught us how to build houses so that we're not just living in a cave anymore. They essentially civilized the planet. And this appears to have happened in the aftermath of the Atlantean catastrophe. So the Great Pyramid was built 11,450 years ago, BC, So it says on its own layout, or at the very least, it was built in an homage to that time. Maybe something was built 11,450 years ago. Maybe the Great Pyramid was built, and maybe the other pyramids were built later according to the original plan. We really don't know. But whoever built the Great Pyramid and all the other pyramids, they definitely wanted us to look at the alignment with Orion and when that happened, okay? Then when you look at all this historical research, what do you see? It appears that society was very, very technological. The reports that we're getting from insiders include the fact that this mothership that they found under the ice in Antarctica was around during the time of Atlantis. So I think we really have a very myopic view of Atlantis. I don't think we fully appreciated how high their technology was, that they had the equivalent of 3D printers for their meals. They had completely lost knowledge of how to raise animals, how to grow grain, or any of that stuff. I mean, they could have looked it up. But then all of a sudden, imagine if you have a society where you have the equivalent of smart glass pads, you know, iPads that are on a piece of glass. You have anti-gravity, and you have 3D printing of your meals, and you have these advanced spiritual capabilities, and then there is a grotesque global catastrophe. The Atlantean flood sinks the island, because there was an island, and everybody on the island dies, or most of them die. According to the Edgar Cayce readings, his own prior incarnation was a being called Ra-Ptah, and that being was aware that Atlantis was going to sink and actually warned a lot of people about it, and was able to get a group of people to flee the areas that were going to flood. And after the earth settled, they went to Egypt, according to the Edgar Cayce readings, which again, if you don't know this, Edgar Cayce, born 1877, died 1945, 14,000 documented medical readings where he was able to analyze and diagnose people's medical problems having nothing but their name and address and an agreement that they would be at that address at the time of the session. No front loading, nothing else except, okay, just be there at this date. And yet, 14,000 times in a row, people's medical conditions were diagnosed, and they were given treatments that actually produced results. So that's a pretty astonishing proof of concept, and Edgar Cayce's readings are another thing that in a post-disclosure society really should be taken seriously, because there is no conventional explanation for what this was. And it is also very interesting that whatever source was speaking through Edgar Cayce always used the pronoun we instead of I, almost always, or at least at the beginning of every session it would begin with we. So the Edgar Cayce readings revealed that his own prior incarnations included this individual who apparently warned everyone about the sinking of Atlantis and then relocated to Egypt and helped to build the Great Pyramid with a group of non-terrestrial humans. And so we'll get into that a little later, because that's a very big focus of my whole life's work. The Law of One series, of course, from 1981 to 1983 is when it was produced intuitively, but there's nothing else like it. It is a question and answer session between a PhD physics professor named Dr. Don Elkins and an alleged extraterrestrial intelligence that claimed in the books that it was responsible for building the Great Pyramid. Now here's the thing that's really interesting. The Great Pyramid is something that is an enigma beyond our wildest imagination. You cannot explain the way that it was built with any type of conventional technology that we have now, and we honestly don't even have a path. At this point in our history of evolution, we don't have a path where we could actually rebuild the Great Pyramid. We really don't. We don't know how this could be done, and I'm going to show you the precision of the architecture here in just a minute, because it is very, very fascinating. Before I do that, let me just go back a couple slides here. Let's cut to this, yeah. I wanted to get this in first. So, I've already been talking about what the insiders have been saying, and this is very, very relevant to what's happening in today's world. Specifically, what they've been telling us is that we're 7 moves from checkmate and both sides know it. Now, what does this actually mean? What we're saying is that the deep state, whatever you want to call it, they are out of time. and there's a variety of different things that are coalescing around them, and we are all going through this massive global awakening as a result. It's not necessarily being televised, but what is being televised in and of itself has become an incredible stimulus for spiritual growth. We are being faced with a global crisis unlike anything we've ever seen before. It's incredibly alarming. It's deeply disturbing. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But what does make sense is that we have been lied to and lied to and lied to and lied to. So even in the case of a disclosure that might be happening in June, it's unlikely that the people are going to feel inclined to trust this and feel that there's something valuable being conveyed. They're more apt to get reactive and say they're angry, they're frustrated, they want more information. There will probably be a bunch of groups of citizens that come together that want to do things. And remember, what did we say for dozens, well, not dozens of years, but many years now? We've been saying that UFO disclosure was always planned as the last-ditch effort of the deep state. So disclosure is not just something that happens whenever you feel like it. We've been getting briefings for many years that disclosure is a tool, that disclosure will be used when the deep state really has its back against the wall to try to win over favor, so that once people find out who they really are and what they're really doing, they'll say, well, you don't want to hurt us, or you don't want to arrest any of us, because now we're going to surrender, and we're going to give you all this really great stuff. We're going to give you new technology. We're going to tell you that extraterrestrials are real. Are people going to fall for that this time? Probably not. I don't think there's any type of gift that could be given that would kind of roll back what we've already seen and make people feel good about it. So this is a situation that, of course, has become so contentious that all of this material disappears. If I were to talk about it here, my channel would disappear, so we're not going to go into any detail beyond a certain point. But I did want to remind you about one thing. So going back to the slide, and I read this last time, but I want to get there again. All these different things, and there's only one thing you really want to keep your eyes on in the midst of all of it. So we are in the most dangerous period of time we've ever had. This is the period where things are the most threatening. Now, this is something new. This came out on April 30th. And, you know, Santa Surfing's not the only one I subscribe to. It's just one of them. And she does pump out tons and tons of stuff. It's like 100 a day or more. But anyway, you can catch things. And so this is one of the things that I caught. Now, let's... when I was talking to you last time about this whole situation of disclosure and how it's going to happen, where this is taking us, remember that I said that the Navy should be capitalized, and I had a whole little section in the last video about the Navy. Now, by the way, the echo that's in the last video, it's only there for, I think, 6 or 7 or 8 minutes at the beginning, and then it goes away. I do have to fix that in post. It turns out it was burned into the original, and it appears that it was because of my mistake. I left 2 windows open for the stream, and so they were echoing between each other, and it's in the original. But I am going to fix that, and we are going to re-upload the stealth blimp discussion, because I think that's very important, and the follow-up discussion, I do still intend to do a video on that as well, so don't give up on us, folks. The echo was a lot harder to remove than we thought. We'll have to use software to do it, but it will sound a lot better when we do that. Anyway, if you remember what was happening in that show, I was telling you, you know, my publisher has been on my case about this because when I wrote Awakening in the Dream, I wasn't allowed to capitalize the word Navy. In other books, I've been able to capitalize Navy, but now apparently, I'm not sure how this works. Back in the 60s and 70s in journalism, there was the Chicago Manual of Style, as it was called, and that was the Bible for how you're supposed to write any type of article for a newspaper, magazine, etc. Well, apparently the go-to style manual has now said Navy cannot be capitalized. And honestly, to me, this is really, really silly because it is the Navy, it is a group, and when it's a group of people, it's you capitalize it. So like not capitalizing Navy is almost to me like another way of these elites showing us they're in control, they get to decide the rules. So I made this whole entreaty about capitalizing the word Navy. Well, that was on whatever it was, April 26th, I believe, or something like that. April 26th, 27th is when I did the last show. April 30th, the Navy comes out with an astonishing cipher that involves the capitalization of the word Navy and other capitalizations, and they may very well have watched this show, and they may have been sending us a little thank you note for what we did. So I want to show you this, okay? So let's go back to the slide now. All right. So it says here, U.S. Navy tweet today, and again, this is April 30th, decoded capital letters of the message part. So first of all, let's look at the actual tweet. So you can see right here, sure enough, it says 2:17 a.m., April 30th, 2021. So it's really only like 2 days after I did the show. And then, of course, the Navy Explosive Ordnance Disposal. Notice that all of this is capitalized. And the word ever is capitalized, so you have an E. And then also, to really understand the message, you would look at coming soon and say, okay, those are also capitalized. So we have a certain number of capital letters. And then you also have the hashtag EOD Day, which we're not even really sure what that's about yet. I mean, I could go look it up. But anyway, so this is a very interesting thing. And this is not the first time, by the way, that something like this happens. So, is it possible, I'll use the Ancient Aliens wording, is it possible that these capital letters mean something? And if so, what do they mean? Well, Santa Surfing, or whoever it was that posted this, actually used a online software program where you type in a letter chain, a string of letters, and it will tell you what types of phrases can you pull out of the thing and use, where you can put these words together and it will actually make sense. So it's gematria, right? So what we're doing is we're looking at the adding up of the value of the letters, and what we're seeing here is that when you add up these letters, they all add up to 1002 on the right there in terms of their numerical value. So the gematria includes things like enjoy the show, we will prevail, and spiritual war. Now, is that real or not? I don't know. But it's interesting, and it is interesting that I was talking about capitalizing the Navy, and then this thing comes out, because enjoy the show, of course, is a phrase that you may be familiar with without getting into any other detail. Okay? So again, getting back to this notion of the pyramid, let's go back to the slides real quick. It's hard to imagine, when you look at the second pyramid there and you see the top of it and how clean looking it is, and then you see that it doesn't extend down to the bottom, it's hard to imagine that the pyramid was originally covered with these stones, that both of these big pyramids were completely covered, and they were covered in such detail that it became like a mirror-polished white limestone exterior. When you look at it now, all you see is a bunch of decaying stone blocks. I mean, yes, these are beautiful images, but perhaps the decaying nature of the pyramids, again, make it look like, oh, this is not really any advanced technology that was designing this. This is just something that primitive people built, and they really liked sticking man's head on a lion's body. We don't know why. Okay. And of course, we talked about the capstone. So let's just start to break this down, folks, because I don't want to spend all day long talking. I actually have other things to do. Believe it or not. So the first thing that is very, very fascinating is just to simply assess the number of blocks of stone in the Great Pyramid. There are 2.3 million blocks of stone, and each of them weighs between 2.5 and 70 tons. There is no crane today that can lift such massive stones. We don't have anything. In other words, when you're looking at a crane, the crane needs to have a weight on it that's heavier than the stone. Now, have you ever heard of a crane that's more than like 5 or 6 tons? Probably not. 20-ton crane? No. 50-ton crane? Absolutely not. Nobody builds stuff like that. There's no reason to. They would be completely massive, and we never use building materials that are that heavy, so it wouldn't make any sense. You couldn't justify it in terms of its expense for building. So again, the Japanese tried to build a replica of the Great Pyramid at 1/5 of its normal scale, not even at all a regular size, and they completely failed. They were not able to get the Great Pyramid to be replicated at 1/5 scale because the cranes are too light. You can't do it. So how in the world could this be done? Going back to the slide once again, the total mass of the pyramid is about 6.3 million tons. The conventional view is that, it took them 20 years to build the Great Pyramid. Well, wait a minute. You would have to lay one of these stones every 2.2 minutes, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 20 years. 20 years, every 2.2 minutes, you lay down another stone. How in the world are you going to get people to do this when you can't use even the best heavy machinery that we have today? And if you think about the mass of a human being, right? The mass of a human being, the heaviest human being is probably going to be 300 pounds, maybe 500 pounds, but probably in Egypt with the kind of stuff they were eating, you're not going to get anybody that heavy. Let's just even conservatively say the heaviest you're going to get is 300 pounds, okay? How many units of 300 pounds are there in a ton? Well, a ton is supposedly, 2,000 pounds? I think it's 2,000 pounds. So we're talking about, even right there, just to get 1 ton, the mass of at least 6 people to push 1 ton. 2 tons, let's say 7 people, right? So 2 tons would be 14 people. 4 tons would be 28 people. And then they've all got to be able to push and create the full weight of their entire body as a thrust mechanism. That's not going to happen. Maybe if you're lucky, you can push half of your weight. So now you got to chop those numbers in half. Now you're talking about a stone that's weighing 70 tons, where you probably need 14 people to push 1 ton. So now you have a 70 times 14 number of people to move 1 70-ton block of stone. And then you're supposed to do that every 2.2 minutes, 24 hours a day for 20 years. It's not going to happen. It's impossible. This right there should be one of the big clues that this could not have been built by humans pushing things around. There had to be some kind of technology involved. And again, if we're going to get a disclosure about the idea that UFOs are real and that they're anti-gravity machines, anti-gravity would be able to do this. If you could levitate a UFO and the craft and its occupants inside, then theoretically that means you've cracked the problem of gravity, and theoretically you could get more levitation than just your craft. You could levitate a block. And then it becomes really obvious, folks, that if someone had a UFO, if they had traveled from another place and they had come out here somehow, then they would be able to use gravity any way they want. They could take stones and make them as light as soap bubbles, and that is exactly what I believe we are seeing. This is the explanation that dissolves the skepticism and actually makes us take a real heavy look at exactly what's going on and where this is going. So what I'm saying is we got to look at this in a whole new way. We have to take stock of our knowledge. And we have to see that the Great Pyramid is ultimately American, too. This is on the dollar bill. Our founding fathers took it very seriously. They knew there was something about the Great Pyramid that couldn't have been done by anybody here on Earth. And especially in the 1700s, I think that would be a lot more obvious. So let's now go back to the slide. I'm going to show you more of the things that make it completely impossible that the pyramid could have been built by anybody here on Earth. And you may not have heard of this, but it is absolutely mind-blowing. So here's the next thing. The leveling of the base of the pyramid is incredible. No corner of the pyramid's base is more than 1/2 inch higher or lower than the others. So, what does that mean? That means that that means that the pyramid is going to give you a level of leveling in which, to do this architecturally, we would need lasers that have very precise. You'd have to stick things in the ground, you'd have to use lasers, you'd have to have an altimeter, so you'd have to know exactly how high off the ground you are. And then you would have to calculate that none of the 4 bases are less than 1/2 inch higher or lower. Now, if you think this is just a normal stunt, it's not, okay? because, and we can say this quite emphatically, this is significantly beyond the finest architectural standards of anything that we have today. You can't do it. You can't do it at all. When we build a building, you might think that the building is aligned properly. You might think that it's straight up and down, when in fact, if you actually go and you look at the four corners, you look at the natural contour of the ground, most of these buildings are made by construction firms. They use bulldozers to level out the land, and they're going to try to make it flat, but there's going to be some contour there. So it's totally not uncommon for each side of a building to have 6 inches or even up to a foot or more difference in their height, even though it looks like it's the same on the ground. So for the Great Pyramid to have less than half an inch apart on all 4 corners, when you're looking at this absolutely colossal object, it completely defies the possibility of any humans building this. And again, why am I saying this now? Because they're going to tell us that UFOs exist. And when we get UFOs, we should get the pyramid almost a la carte. It just comes along with the order. Oh, well, you get the French fries, no extra charge. The French fries is the pyramid in this case. And the pyramid could not have been built by primitive people. And the people in the Egyptian antiquities know this, but they're not telling us. They continually reinforce this idea that people built the pyramid with their hands using conventional technology. But as I'm showing you, this is impossible just because people don't weigh enough to be able to move blocks this large. You would need a gigantic gang of people pulling that stone, if you're lucky, if that could even work. It's very, very, very unlikely. The only thing that really makes sense is some sort of anti-gravity, but then again, it's not just about levitating the stones, it's about the precision with how they were assembled. How in the world did they build this building where each of the 4 corners that are very, very far apart, if you've been in front of the pyramid, it is massive. It had to be some kind of laser-controlled process. It had to be, or whatever is beyond laser, a technology that we don't know, because it's so precise. All right, back to the slide. We also know another thing that is incredibly, incredibly bizarre, and that is that the Great Pyramid was built in the only place on Earth that is the exact balance point of all the mass on Earth. And don't worry, I'm not going to lose you, so just stick with me here, okay? What does this really mean? It means that if you draw a line north to south, and then you draw another line east to west. So the north to south line, okay, could be a line of longitude. The east to west line could be a line of latitude, right? So what we're now looking for is, if you draw that line of longitude top to bottom, and you go straight down across any one strip of the entire Earth, where is that line going to connect with the most amount of land? It turns out that you have to go from the North Pole down through Europe, down through Egypt, and down through the bottom of Africa. There is a line of longitude where that line hugs more land than any other place on Earth. It crosses that particular line, and you can mathematically determine this with advanced instruments. The biggest line of landmass crosses not a little bit off to the side, but exactly dead through the middle of the Great Pyramid. That alone should erase any idea that the people who built it were not a global circumnavigating culture. They had the knowledge of the globe, they had the knowledge of longitude and latitude, they knew what the Earth looked like because they built it on that exact line of longitude. But then what's even crazier, and perhaps this is something intrinsic to the Earth as well, is that you can start drawing lines of latitude east to west, and you can also find an east to west line that hugs more land than any other part. Statistically, you can figure out where that would be. You just calculate, okay, how many miles of land are there on this latitude line? How many miles of land are there on this latitude line all around the world? It turns out that the exact place where the greatest amount of land is on a latitude line is exactly where the Great Pyramid is. And I'm not talking a little bit above or a little bit below, I'm talking dead on the money. So it's like crosshairs. It's like X marks the spot on a treasure map. The exact balance point of the largest amount of land north to south and the largest amount of land east to west is exactly where the Great Pyramid was built. And that is astonishing. That suggests, once again, that whoever did this knew what the Earth's structure was and deliberately built it there. And in works that I've written that are beyond the scope of what I'm going to do today, I make the argument that that balance point of the Earth's mass is also an energetic node. In other words, the new science that we've been studying, that I'm going to talk a lot more about in Ascension Mystery School 3.0, Gateway to Galactic Mind. This is the class that's starting in 2 weeks. I'm going to be doing it every Sunday right here on this set. It is a subscription-based thing. It's a lot less expensive than almost any other conferences that are out there of comparable material. But this is our big online conference for this year. I don't know if I'm going to do another one this year or not. There's a lot of things happening with the hover cars and energy technologies that are very exciting, and I hope to be able to talk to you more about that very soon. We might be getting hover cars a lot sooner than you think. And we probably could make them with conventional gasoline. There's certain plasma corona technologies we could do that actually they would build the craft would make a plasma corona. It would levitate by electrostatics, and in that particular type of anti-gravity design, you could make it work with gas. You could fill the car with gas and still get anti-gravity. We've talked about that, but if you have these other technologies that are really, really amazing that you don't need fuel for anymore, why don't we just jump right over to that? And that appears to be what we're going to get. And so a lot of people in the oil community are going to be very upset by this, but we desperately need this technology to survive as a planet. And I do believe the military knows this, and I do believe that this is why we're seeing some very, very interesting signs that they're going to give us a disclosure that might be quite an awakening for the mass consciousness. So getting back to the pyramid again, if this concept of the mass of the Earth, where you have a longitude line with the greatest amount of land and a latitude line with the greatest amount of land, it's as if the designers of the pyramid said, we need to build the pyramid here because we need that mass. And so in my other works, I've talked about how that balance point of the Earth's mass actually is the most important energy node on Earth. It is the navel of the Earth. And in another set of discussions that go far beyond what I have time for today, there is a scientist who studied all these different ancient architectural landforms, and his conclusion was that they are all encoded based on the prime meridian, which is the 0 degrees longitude line, not being in Greenwich, England, as it is now. That's why it's called GMT, or Greenwich Mean Time. But instead, you put the prime meridian on the Great Pyramid of Giza. You put it on that longitude line, which is the logical place if it's the balance point of the Earth's mass. An advanced extraterrestrial civilization would know this. That's the most logical way to create longitude, not just because the British Empire conquered the world and said, well, we're going to make it right here, mates. Let's do it right in Greenwich. No, do it where the land's the most thick on the longitude line. That makes sense. It's geometrically defined. There's a lot of really cool stuff about how all of these longitude coordinates tether to the prime meridian, and that work is called the Code, and it's one of the original things that Richard C. Hoagland came out with in his book in 1996 is when I read it. 93 actually is when I started reading it, Monuments of Mars. So we could talk about that more in another video because it would be really good to bring some of that back now, and I probably will. That's a great idea. Anyway, if you're looking at this idea of the longitude line being capturing the most land and the latitude line capturing the most land, what is the probability that something like this could have happened by random chance? Believe it or not, it is 1 in 3 billion, folks. 1 in 3 billion chance that the pyramid could have been built exactly where it is. And that is just absolutely astonishing. Definitely the people who did this knew that the Earth was round, and they knew where the 0 degrees longitude line should be, and they knew where the balance point of the Earth's mass was. It's like if you wanted to play that balance game, if you ever did this where you take a little thin thing and you cut it out from cardboard like this, and you put a penny on each side, and then you put a little point in the middle, you can balance it on your finger. And with the 2 pennies and everything, if you make it about symmetrical, you'll be able to hold it. And it's a cool little balance trick for little science geek kids like that. Well, this is like if you were going to balance the Earth on your finger, like I could do it with the egg here, like it was the Harlem Globetrotters, right? You want to balance the Earth on your finger. That would be where you'd need to do it. So obviously, this is going to have effects on geotectonic strain, plate push, and of course, there's other aspects of energetics that get into a science is way beyond what we're going to talk about in today's talk, but that's why I'm doing the Gateway to Galactic Mind class. There is an amazing scientific overview of ascension and what these ancient prophecies were telling us about the coming solar event. It looks like the sun is going to give off some kind of flash, and if you are an ascended being, if you have learned the lessons to be here on Earth, you get to stay here, and if you haven't learned those lessons yet, you are ethically transplanted to another planet, and you don't have a terrifying experience. It's very pleasant. It's essentially your own ascension, ET contact. It's just you might not realize what's happening. So if you look at these ancient prophecies, they all seem to say that this mill for grinding grain is going on, right? And remember, the extraterrestrials were giving everybody this grain technology. They wanted people to have this technology. They wanted people to understand how this really works. But the technology is fundamentally spiritual in nature. It is something that cannot be undermined. When you look at what that grain mill is really saying, there's a central axle, and then it's going around in a circle, and that is a metaphor of the Earth's axis. So you grind up grain with a central axle, and then you have this wheel, this millstone that's going around in circles. You blow on it, and then all the chaff goes away, and you're left with flour, okay? Everybody learned this from the ETs, and now they have storable food, so they're apt to survive a lot longer. When you're a hunter-gatherer society, you're totally beholden to whatever you can find in nature. You have famines, you have plagues, you have floods, all these kind of things that would never happen in modern times, of course. We have civilized society. Anyway, what we're dealing with right now is the grain mill having a central axle as a metaphor of this wobble of the Earth's axis. Now, the people who were getting these prophecies had no idea. They definitely did not have the scientific knowledge to understand the relationship between an axle and something rotating around it and the Earth, but the ETs who built the Great Pyramid obviously did. So many of these ancient mythologies do actually build themselves around a grain mill. This happens multiple times in geographically segregated areas of the world. And here's the crazy part, folks. The prophecies invariably say that the axle breaks and that there's some sort of large explosion, and then after that, we are transformed. So that's the big central thesis, that there is a solar event, there is something that goes on that could be interpreted as catastrophic. It appears that this was how the ancient extraterrestrials told us to expect some sort of geological pole shift, where the rotational north of the Earth actually changes. It slips by maybe 21 degrees. And of course, if that were to happen, then life on Earth would cease. You would have 200-mile-an-hour winds. You would have tsunamis that are 100 feet tall, sweeping across the continental United States and every other area. Most of the people like to live in coastal areas, but it doesn't really even matter where you live. If this thing were to happen, you'd probably also get the Yellowstone caldera exploding as a supervolcano. You're going to have supervolcanoes underneath the oceans that explode, and you have everything on Earth basically getting buried under 40 to 400 feet of rocks that are blasted up in the air by the supervolcanoes and then come back down and bury the Earth and everything. Now, this happens over and over again on Earth. This is natural. And this is why when you want to find an ancient culture, an ancient civilization in their ruins, you have to dig down, because they used to be on the surface of the Earth, but now they're not. Now, I understand how scary all this sounds, but again, if you are ascending, you don't experience a catastrophe. And even if you're not ascending, you don't experience a catastrophe, you're relocated. And it's a very enjoyable experience. So the only people who might actually hang around on Earth to experience this catastrophe would be those who have invited it by the choices they've made with their karma. There may be a period of time on Earth where we get some kind of Mad Max thing for those people on that timeline. Other people who are on the Ascension timeline may actually appear to have left the Earth, maybe even for what appears to be many, many years, but they get dropped ahead to when the Earth is ready for them. So we don't really know. There's a lot of mysteries about this, but the modern prophetic traditions have filled in many of the cracks. So again, this all sounds very speculative, and I don't know about this whole solar flash thing, but remember, every ancient culture on Earth talks about this. And the most common way they talk about it is with a grain mill, where the axle of the grain mill represents the Earth's axis, and then the axle breaks, and there's some sort of energetic event. And in these prophecies, people are transformed. That's the part of the prophecy where it gets mysterious and doesn't make any sense, is first of all, you're talking about this grain mill, and then it breaks, but now all of a sudden people have superpowers and light bodies. Okay? Well, Santillan and Van der Shen put it all together. And as I've said in many other talks before, and I will be going through all this ascension information again in Gateway to Galactic Mind, what we actually see in the Hindu tradition is the acknowledgement of a solar flash. They call it the Samvartika fire at the end of an age, or they call it the Yuga fire. And there's many, many references to this in the Hindu scriptures. The Christians obviously have the rapture, and most Christians don't realize that their own beloved religion is mirrored by all the others. That this is not just something Jesus said, this is something everybody was saying. And they told us about the prophecies of when this would be happening, when this solar flash would occur. They described a degradation in society, a degradation in the way that the world is running. And this is exactly what we're seeing now. The prophecies line up perfectly. We're going to cover all this again in Gateway to Galactic Mind. There will be some review. So even if you've seen it before, this is going to be, it will be amazing and new. I'm going to bring in some new stuff. Back to the slide. The next crazy thing about the Great Pyramid is that the sides of the Great Pyramid are aligned with rotational north to 0.06% perfection, or only 3 arc minutes. Now, once again, this is a very, very bizarre situation. It is not anything that is explicable in the conventional viewpoint. How in the world could you build a building that is this perfectly aligned with rotational north? Nobody would be able to do this with today's technology, for the same reason that you couldn't make a building where the sides are only an inch, half an inch higher or lower. I mean, I guess now it's possible. But you would have to really, really get in there and like lay a concrete pad and really get it very, very level, and have an extraordinary, probably a technology where you could pull a whole entire sheet across the concrete as one big piece, and then make sure that you'd have to align the sheet with computers to get it so that it was perfectly flat, get the whole sheet across the whole concrete pad, and then just scrape the whole thing across. And then maybe, if you did it that way, or if we had some other advanced techniques that people were using that involved individual laying of things, you could get it to work. But then again, how do you have that building then stand for thousands of years with all that stone weight and not have any one of the sides subside more than the other side? You see, it doesn't sink down. It stayed only half an inch off after all these years, which also leads one to believe that when it was originally constructed, it was absolutely perfect, and the half-inch variance is only the result of subsidence. That's what I would be inclined to believe. So this is absolutely incredible. But then, to take it to the next level, and to see that, like, wow, you know, we're actually dealing with something where all of the corners are not only that perfectly leveled, but they're aligned with rotational north. Let me be clear, all of the people who studied the pyramid have shown that there is just no way that you could have the rotational north alignment this precise. This is the entire edifice being so precisely built that, again, it's as if you would need, like, I'm using a 3D printing machine right now for some of our prototypes for hover cars and other things that we're working on. So we have a 0.2 millimeter filament length. So that's the tiniest detail that we can get. Now, the 3D printer, the newer ones, have a plate on them that is perfectly aligned with the ground. So it will actually crank itself up and down like this, so it's perfectly flat. It needs to do that. Then you have this digitally controlled head that's going around and making very, very precise movements, just fast enough to print the thing. Most of the models we're printing are taking 8, 9, 10 hours to print because it does it literally one string at a time, just builds it up thread by thread. So you would need something on that level of precision, of 3D printing, to build the Great Pyramid with these type of specifications where it's so precisely aligned with rotational north. I mean, it's absolutely mind-boggling how this could have ever been done. And actually, part of the answer may be some kind of 3D printing or some very advanced version of that. Because if you go back and you read like Secrets of the Great Pyramid by Peter Tompkins, some of the old pyramid books from the 1970s, one of the things that you hear about is pyramid researchers breaking open limestone blocks of the Great Pyramid, and then inside the blocks they found things like strands of human hair. How in the world do you get human hair in limestone that's quarried from a quarry that is millions of years old? Where's the human? How did that human shed their hair and get it inside the limestone? But there's a lot of hair that we find inside the blocks. So many researchers, when this was really at its peak in the 1970s, and there was a big surge of it in the 1700s and 1800s, by the way. We'll get into that in a minute. But many of the researchers that were looking at this said, hey, if there's hair inside the blocks of the Great Pyramid, what is limestone? Let's go back to that. How do you make limestone? Limestone is nothing more than sand. It's just sand that has kind of like a slurry that bound it together. So there's a certain type of mineral substance, a liquid, that has gone in and taken this sand and bound it together so that it makes rock. Well, that sounds a lot like how we make concrete, doesn't it? If there was a way to take a bunch of sand and 3D print the blocks for the pyramid, wouldn't that be cool? And then wouldn't it make sense that if you're pulling the sand off the surface of the desert, that people would have shed hair and your technology wouldn't be good enough to get all the hair out, or you wouldn't really care? So then, think about this. I was just hearing from a friend of mine that we're already starting to 3D print houses now. There's a type of 3D printer that's already been made where it's taking things like dirt and soil, and then it's actually filling that in with some kind of conglomerating material to make that mixture where the dirt is then turned into a block for your house. So you have a 3D printer now where you're 3D printing the blocks to make your house right there on site. So all you need is dirt or whatever material you're using. You're 3D printing the blocks and then you lay them on the house. If you had a very nice computerized system that is like the 3D printer, with, I said, the tray goes up and down, you could take the sand, you could add something to it to make it into stone blocks, and wouldn't that be easier than actually having to carve blocks and move them? Now, the granite inside the Great Pyramid is only around the King's Chamber area, and it's a purple granite called porphyry. That granite definitely appears to have been quarried and moved there over, I believe it's more than 600 miles of distance. So that, I'm not going to say was something that was designed as a 3D printed block, but I do believe that the pyramid's blocks were 3D printed in place. And this explains a whole lot of stuff, how they could have gotten at this precisely. In other words, you only make the block exactly where you want it to be, at exactly the size you want it to be, and you make it on the spot. You're 3D printing it in the location it's going to go. Then you don't need to lift anything heavy. You just need to have a 3D printing technology, which again is not that inconceivable, right? That's where you could start to have it be perfectly leveled. That's where you could start to have it be perfectly aligned with rotational north, only 0.06 degrees off. But wait a minute, David, didn't you also say that the Great Pyramid was at the balance point of the largest amount of land north to south and the largest amount of land east to west? Yes, I did. Are there any other things like that? Yes, there are. If you actually go to this next data point here, you calculate the average height of land above sea level, and then you figure out what that height is, right? Well, what we would do is we would use Miami, Florida as the low, because that is at sea level. There's many places you could use. They just arbitrarily chose Miami. And they chose the Himalayas as the high, and this would be like the K2 mountain. So let's take sea level and the top of K2 or Mount Everest, in this case K2 is a little higher than Mount Everest, so let's take the top of K2 and sea level and figure out what is that height. What is the difference between sea level and the top? So that's the maximum height differential, right? But then what you're going to do is you're going to look at all of the land between the low and the high, and you calculate the average height of land above sea level. Well, believe it or not, the average height of all land above sea level is 5,449 English inches, which is the exact height of the Great Pyramid. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable that not only is the Great Pyramid built on the navel of the earth, but it has the average height of all land above the surface of the earth. Is this all coincidence? The more that we look at this, the less likely it is that that explanation has any weight at all. But even then, I have not yet hit you with the most astonishing thing about the Great Pyramid of all, and that is the infamous casing stones. So back to the slide once again. The Great Pyramid was originally covered with mirror-polished white limestone, and so it looked something like this. Now this is from a video game. It is, I forget what it's called off the top of my head, but there was a movie made about it. Anyway, this is a scene from a video game, and I don't believe that the detail lines on the bottom of the pyramid are true, where it was strips of darker colors. I don't think that part is true, but this is what it would have originally looked like. A mirror-polished, perfect white limestone casing on the outside. That is not the way that it looks now. However, there are many ancient records that report that these casing stones were found. And believe it or not, up until the 1300s, people were witnessing the Great Pyramid as this gleaming white, shiny, mirror-polished limestone structure. If you've ever seen interesting caves, there was one in New York State called Howe Caverns, and I went there as a kid, and it has stalactites and stalagmites. And you've probably seen this. When water is dripping off the surface of a cave, there's some minerals that come down with the water, and they form these beautiful, beautiful pieces of rock that look alive and organic. And they're made from the water dripping down, and then the minerals that are deposited along the way, they're actually made of limestone. So those stalactites and stalagmites are limestone. And what's interesting about limestone, which you can see with the stalactites and stalagmites, is that the more they get rained on, the more water falls on them, the more glossy they get, the more polished they get, the better they look. And this continues to happen indefinitely. So let's be clear. If you build the Great Pyramid with white polished limestone, you have a gleaming white, perfect surface on the outside. It's only going to get more gleaming. It's only going to look more perfect. It's only going to look more amazing as thousands of years go by and the rain keeps falling on it. Now, in the 1300s, there was a huge, huge earthquake. And unfortunately, what happened was that the pyramids were shaken so hard that on the second pyramid and the first pyramid, most of these casing stones just kind of fell off. And it created a huge mess, and they were all over the place. Now, the polite thing to do would have been to leave everything the way that it was, because there was thousands and thousands of these casing stones. However, the Arabs at the time said, wow, we have these gigantic pieces of pure white limestone. It's as if there's all this building material right here for us to use. We don't have to go anywhere. We don't have to quarry it. We can just steal it and use it. So that's what they did. It's very sad, but all of those fallen white limestone pieces were hauled off and carved up and quarried and used to build beautiful mosques in Cairo. So we don't get to see most of this anymore. And in fact, the ancient written legends of these casing stones were then dismissed as mythology. And this is the way that things have been going for a long, long time, from the 1300s onward. And people didn't even believe anymore that the pyramid ever had these casing stones. And it's easy to understand why, because it's so fantastic. It so defies any type of common sense or logic to think that the pyramid would have looked like this. that people just say, oh, well, come on. I mean, it's primitive people built it. It couldn't have looked like that. That's too amazing. That's too perfect. It never would have happened. Well, that became the prevailing academic view. And so all throughout the 1700s into the 1800s, if you tried to argue that the pyramid once had casing stones on it, you were mocked, you were laughed at, and you were ridiculed. Now, one of the people who was actually doing the mocking, doing the ridiculing, was Flinders Petrie. And Sir Flinders Petrie, I believe, or it might have been Colonel Howard Vyse. It's one of these two guys. Neither one of them I really like that much when you read about everything they were doing. But they did make incredible contributions. I think this one was Vyse. I'm not sure, but let's just go with Vyse. So Colonel Howard Vyse, or Petrie, it's one of the two, actually didn't believe that the casing stones existed. And Vyse in particular was a notorious skeptic. So he says, I'm going to scientifically prove once and for all that there were no casing stones on the Great Pyramid. How do we do this? Well, we got to dig out the whole base. We'll dig out the whole base of the pyramid because it was still buried. And, because at the very base, the stones aren't going to fall off. And if there were casing stones there, then some of them should still be there at the bottom. And of course, that's not going to happen. So then we can scientifically prove once and for all this is BS. Well, so Colonel Howard Vyse's people did dig out the base. And then what they found was this. Sure enough, what you're seeing right here are the surviving remnants of the original casing stones. So you notice this is the bottom of the pyramid, and you see a wedge-shaped object where it is square on the back, like a cube, but then on the front it is a strict diagonal slope. These are made out of white limestone. It's a better stone than the surrounding pyramid. You can't really see it because of some of the weathering, but you can kind of see that it's a little bit brighter. And also the floor was made of white limestone as well in this case. So notice that the stones on the bottom are also the same color. So this is the surviving remnant of this. Here's another picture of this, okay? Now, this was a shock to Colonel Howard Vyse and all of his pyramid colleagues, because now they see absolute proof that all these eyewitness reports, of which there are many, it even goes to the Greek historian Herodotus, he saw it, Pliny the Elder, he saw it. There's plenty of reports of the casing stones and people witnessing them. It goes on and on for centuries and centuries. Then we found these buried casing stones, folks. So we see them where he was expecting not to find them. Instead, they actually did find them. And that was, I'm sure, incredibly frustrating. So this is a very strange situation. What does it tell us? And where do we go with this information? How in the world could somebody have built the pyramid to look like a mirror-polished marble sculpture? A perfect marble white pyramid that's absolutely, according to the ancient records like Herodotus, Pliny the Elder talked about boys running up and down the sides of the pyramid because it was perfectly smooth, that they would run barefoot right up the pyramid and people would tip them for doing it. Apparently also the casing stones did have some kind of written language on them. There was an actual series of writings on the surface of the pyramid which apparently were copied down, and they're called the pyramid texts. And so the pyramid texts refer back to this time of what they call Zep Tepi, or the first time, and that's where you get all these illustrations on the Egyptian tomb walls of beings that are not exactly human-looking, but are human-like, where they might be having a human body, but they have a bird-like head, or they have the head of a dog, or some other kinds of things. So this is very peculiar. The Zep Tepi thing cannot be denied once we start to really unpack the age and the antiquity of the pyramid and how incredible its construction was. How did it get to be like this? How did it get to where we have these casing stones on the outside? Now let me point out something else. The distance between each of these casing stones, if you go back and look at it real quick, you can just see here that, and let's go back to the other slide too, that these stones are massive. I mean, it's hard to see because you don't have people standing on it except on the far end. But if you look on the far end, you see that there's people standing up on the top of the stones, okay? And if you look at that height reference in this picture, you can actually see, okay, yeah, so these people are not as tall as the stones themselves. The stones are taller than the people. So I want you to get that reference and really look at that. I hope you can see the people. Let me know in the comments if you can't see the people. Somebody said, why are people asking if he has allergies? I do have allergies. There's lots of pollen here. I'm sorry about my stuffy nose. Anyway, so these are massive, massive stones, okay? They're huge. And when you look at the distance between the cracks of these stones, which are taller than human beings, how far apart do you think the stones are? Do you think they're 1/4 of an inch apart, 1/8 of an inch apart, 1/16 of an inch apart? Or are they even tighter than that? Well, it turns out that it's 1/100th of an inch. So you have planes of rock that can be 8 feet tall, 6 to 7 feet deep, that are 1/100th of an inch apart. The only way we could do this is with some kind of 3D printer. The idea of cutting those stones to be that tightly connected is ridiculous. It would take so much time, it would be so impossible. Why not just print it in place? Why not just print the stone where you need it to be? If that isn't crazy enough, Colonel Howard Vyse, I'm sure, and his people were angry. They didn't like the fact they found the casing stones, so they're going to do some destructive research. One of the things they did is they whacked on these stones with a big sledgehammer. And when they did that, around where the intersection was between two stones, they found that in that crack of 1/100th of an inch, there was some kind of mortar that holds them together. In other words, they were sealed together with a cement in a 1/100th of an inch crack. Now bear in mind, the best architectural standard we've ever used here on Earth is the tiles on the space shuttle. The tiles on the space shuttle have 1/50th of an inch tolerance between them, and that's intended to keep people alive as they're fighting the burn of going through Earth's atmosphere on re-entry. These gigantic blocks of stone, there, I'm sounding a lot like Ancient Aliens now, gigantic blocks of stone, 8 feet tall, 6 feet deep, 1/100th of an inch apart, and there's a mortar holding them together, and when you hit it with a sledgehammer, the surrounding stone breaks before the mortar. The mortar is stronger than the actual stone itself. This, again, is exactly what we would expect to see if you were 3D printing these stones into position, so that when you make two of them next to each other, the last step that you use is to create some kind of laser or some kind of particle beam where you're melting the stone together, you're sealing it together. So you're pouring them into position, you're 3D printing them, and then you're sealing the crack with some sort of particle beam or laser or something. That's the only real explanation for something like this. So again, 3D printing gives us kind of a conventional, more easy to understand way of how in the world these casing stones could have been made. But that is just so amazing, so astonishing. Like, what are we really learning here? Well, what we're learning is this was not built by terrestrial human beings here on Earth. It's just much, much too advanced. Okay, so back to the slide here. You can see the people standing up there. Now just try to imagine the entire surface of the pyramid covered with these, and then an earthquake tosses them all loose, and now it looks like a big old heap of rocks. So the pyramid is built in total of about 115,000 of these blocks that average 100 inches or 8.3 feet in thickness. That's the average. Much, much too big for people to be pushing them around with their own body weight. You couldn't get all those people. You couldn't even get animals to do it. It's just way too much. Some of these average stones are coming in around 16 tons. Again, remember the Japanese could not build it at even 1/5 scale. The casing stones were so bright in the daytime that if you actually looked at the Great Pyramid, you would get blinded. So it was a blinding experience to look at the Great Pyramid, and they called it Takut, or the light, apparently because you literally couldn't look at the pyramid during the day. If the sunlight was catching it wrong, it would blind your eyes. But this also allowed people to see it from very far away. Even all the way over in Israel, apparently they could see the pyramid when it was like this. So again, as I just said before, back to the slide, these joints were fitted so perfectly that you can't even fit a fingernail in the crack. The fingernail is 1/50th of an inch. And again, this is better than the tiles on the space shuttle. And I already said that the mortar in the cracks are stronger than surrounding stone. And we already talked about how some of these mortared areas are 5 feet by 7 feet in the vertical. I said 8 feet, I was a little bit off. The slides are more right, because I did this from research. Now, there's other things that you need to know about the Great Pyramid, and I'm going to start to go through a little of this now. But I don't want to make this particular show a long show. Okay, we're not going to do the 3 hours. I'm going to try to keep it short. But let's go through a little bit of this now. So let's talk about the pyramid inch for a moment. Now, getting back to the slide, the pyramid inch is slightly different than the inch that we now use in the English metric, well, not the metric system, in the English system, which is not the metric system, before the metric system. The pyramid inch corresponds to 1.00106 inches, so it is slightly longer than a regular inch, and just for the purpose of argument, this would also be in centimeters, 2.5426924. So, what are we saying here? The Great Pyramid has this pyramid inch of 1.00106 inches encoded into its measurements. Remember how precise everything is? Remember the 1/50th to 1/100th of an inch cracks between the stones? Remember the massive precision of the aligning of the base and the aligning of the sides with rotational north? The fact that it's got the greatest longitude landmass, the greatest latitude landmass, and the average height of all land above the surface of the ground, and that just so happens to all be in the Great Pyramid? Well, the precision doesn't stop there. The precision gets much more interesting when you start to calculate all of these measurements in the pyramid based on the pyramid inch. So what we're led to believe, and I'm going to show you all the science of this in just a second, but just so that you're clear on this, what we're led to believe is that there was exactly an ideal inch that was given to us by extraterrestrials who built the Great Pyramid, and that the actual English system may have been derived from these measurements, but that when they made the exact cut of what the inch would be, that it was 0.00106 inches too small. So you have to add that extra 0.00106 inches to make it the right size. So again, now we've very precisely measured this original cut of what the inch was. People made a little measurement out of it, and then that measurement became standardized. So if the measurement was very slightly off, it's actually kind of the same as the fact that supposedly video is 30 frames per second. We were just dealing with this, trying to solve the problems with this studio that we're having. We're still have major technical problems, but again, we're at least getting it to work. But one of the main pieces of equipment that I wanted to work today isn't working, and we have no idea why, because it worked fine last night. But that always happens. Anyway, the actual frame rate is not 30 frames per second, it's 29.97. And the reason why is that when they thought they were making it 30 frames per second, their use of the time quanta of 1 second was a little bit off. So it's not quite 30 frames per second exactly, it's actually 29.97. So this is why you have to have 29.97 frames per second to reach the normal broadcast standard. So it's the same concept with the inch. They got it a little bit wrong, the measurement was a little bit off, that's the one we've been using. The perfect measurement, as you're going to see, is in the Great Pyramid. But what also is fascinating is the idea that this pyramid inch is a better inch to use than the one that we've been using, because it can be derived from the Earth's own measurements. Now, what do I mean by that? What we're going to do here is we're going to look at the Earth, and we're going to take the pole-to-pole height of the Earth. We're going to look at it from the North Pole to the South Pole. We're going to draw a line from the top to the bottom, and then we're going to measure that line very precisely. Now, this isn't going to be affected very much, if at all, by any increase in the Earth's bulging, because that's going to happen at the equators. area, so this is going to stay pretty much the same north to south. Well, what you can do is you can take that length of the North Pole to the South Pole, and you can chop it up into exactly 500 million units. 500 million measurement units, okay? And if you take the Earth's distance from the North Pole to the South Pole, chop it up into 500 million, those are exactly 500 million units of 1.00106 inches. You follow me? Now, is that arbitrary? No. Because anybody could say, hey, why shouldn't we use a measurement system that is scaled to the planet that we're using it on? In other words, let's take the north to south distance of the Earth, let's divide it up into exactly 500 million units, and if those units end up being something that's of a useful size for us, then let's use it. Well, that's exactly what happens. The pyramid inch is precisely 1/500 millionth of the Earth's polar diameter. That is the result of extraterrestrials. That could not be a random coincidence, and anybody who thinks it is doesn't have enough ingenuity. The idea that the Great Pyramid was built with these inches as a measuring system, and then the idea that that inch is exactly 1/500 millionth of the Earth's diameter on the poles, is not a coincidence. It's a very convenient thing to take a distance and chop it up into a nice round number like 500 million. And then use that as your measuring system. And it requires that you had the technology to be able to measure the exact distance of the Earth from the North Pole to the South Pole, which clearly is not something the Egyptians could do. So again, in a post-disclosure society, this is why I'm making this video. This is why I'm not going to make it too long. I want you to tune into the idea that this is really happening, that the Great Pyramid is built with these inches, and these inches correspond to the Earth's measurements naturally. That suggests the work of higher intelligence. That suggests the work of people who knew exactly what they're doing. So again, we're going to go to the slide here. So if you take this pole-to-pole height of the Earth, you chop it into exactly 500 million inches, then if you apply this inch to the Great Pyramid, you get the exact length of an Earth year in the perimeter. Now, I'm not going to go into all the technical details here because they are extensive. But 365.2422 is the exact number of days in an Earth year. And what we find is that 365.2422 is precisely encoded redundantly in the measurements of the pyramid, around its base, around its perimeter, and in other areas as well, including that there is actually a sphere in the antechamber leading into the king's chamber. And if you draw a sphere in the antechamber, it's exactly 365.2422 inches in circumference. So this sphere inside the chamber of the pyramid, in pyramid inches, is the exact measurement of the length of the Earth's day. The length of the Earth's year in days, down to the decimal point, 4 decimal point accuracy. Once again, it would only be an advanced society that could calculate that the Earth's year is exactly 365.2422 days. You need advanced equipment to be able to make that kind of a discernment. So that right there, when you see this Earth dimensionality encoded in the pyramid inch, which again is 1/500 millionth of the polar diameter of the Earth, somebody is telling us that the pyramid symbolizes the Earth. And another thing that's very fascinating is that you can actually draw a hemisphere over the pyramid. And sure enough, the base, the equator of a sphere will connect with the 4 corners of the pyramid. And then you have this height where the top of the sphere is as well. Yeah, so it's just hot in the room and we have lots of fan noise. And so if you guys are hearing that in the background, if anybody's commenting on that, I apologize. Okay, David says, address the loose ends for once, please. That's Jeff Rehag. What loose ends do you want me to address? You know, well, yeah, so somebody tell me what to... Mommy, Alien Wilcock is scaring me. Are you? I didn't want you to be scared. Okay. Somebody says I'm echoing. There is an echo sound, okay.
It randomly comes, which is very odd.
We really don't know what this is, folks. If that's the least tampering that we're getting, it will be great. And again, please remember, although I haven't done the stealth blimp one yet, I will be able to easily get rid of this in post, okay? So you're only going to hear an echo live, and I'm going to do both the stealth blimp and this video at the same time, because I got to use a software called Isotope RX7 and cut the echo out. And then it's about making sure that it doesn't sound too mechanical when I do that. So you're going to get echo live, but in the finished version, you're never going to hear it again. So just hang in there with me, and I do apologize for this. So somebody said, go play in the traffic, trolls. Okay, well, so then we say some people are getting echo and some people are not. I don't know. It's all kind of crazy stuff, folks, but let's just also make sure. Let me look at the console real quick. Oh, we didn't even have console open. Okay, so yes, our second track is muted. So we don't really know what's... No, that's not going to do anything. But yeah, I mean, go ahead and turn all that down if you want, but I highly doubt it's going to do anything. Anyway, one of the easiest ways to disable this is just... Hold on, let me do it. Turn off the 48-volt preamp, and then it's definitely not going to run. Okay, so now we have absolutely, totally disabled our second microphone. We have a microphone over there, which only comes on if it's being used. It was muted. Oh, now you're saying no echo. Okay, so... Wow, you guys are writing so fast I can't keep up with this stuff. It is kind of strange, right? I mean, I have to do a performance, but I also want to read a little of your comments, but it's like, it's just so fast I can't really keep up with it. Anyway. Yeah. There's so many things we could talk about. And please stop complaining about the echo. We're going to fix it in post, okay? Just get over it. Okay, but I see a lot of echo. Okay, so that's probably our adversaries doing this to us, and we don't know what it is, okay? So we will fix it in post. Thank you. All right, so... If the Great Pyramid is built to show you the Earth's year along its base, along its perimeter, and I don't remember exactly how it's done. I think it's 3652.422 total inches. I think that's what it is. So you get the 365.2, but then you got to move the decimal point, and then that's the exact number of inches around the perimeter. I think that's what it is, or it might be that it's 365.2 inches per side. It's one of those two. I forget. But then, the most amazing thing of all is the connection between the pyramid and the precession of the equinoxes. So let's check this out. The precession of the equinoxes, that number is actually revealed in the diagonal length of the pyramid. If you draw from the bottom corner up to the top, down to another bottom corner on the opposite side, that length is exactly 25,826.4 pyramid inches. And what's interesting about this is that it's actually the length of the perfect precession of the equinoxes, not the ideal one of 25,920 years, but the one that we actually measure now. This variable is much closer. So the ideal, if you will, harmonic precession of the equinoxes is exactly 25,920 years. But then if you measure what the precession appears to be doing today, it's much closer to this figure of 25,826.4 years. So let's look at this pyramid now, and you're going to see this. Okay, so I want you to look at the far left corner, which has the capital C, and the far right corner, which is the capital A, and we're going to draw a line between these 2 points. The line is going to go up the east side of the pyramid up to the small letter C, and then you're going to draw a diagonal across that square base from small c to small a. Okay, you draw a diagonal line, then small a to large a. That is the length that we are talking about. And so, if you look at it this way and you count up that length, it's exactly 25,826.4 pyramid inches, which again is very, very close to this strange counter-rotating wobble of the Earth that all the different ancient mystery teachings tell us about, of 25,920 years. And then the mystery gets even more outrageous And this is where I'm going to give you a little promo for some of the stuff that I was talking about in my book. The new book is called Awakening in the Dream. And if we cut over here real quick, you can see it's right there. Yes, I am very proud of this book. It's probably the highest ranked book that we've had in terms of the stars. It was 5 stars straight for a long time. There's over 1,000 reviews of this now on Amazon. And even some of the top Hollywood movies never get that many, and that's what my publisher told me. They were astonished at the kind of engagement that you guys have with this material. But again, it's like $20, and it's a great way for you to interface with this work. I have a couple chapters on the pyramid in this book, and I go through the pyramid timeline, and this idea that the pyramid inch is being used to delineate the flow of time, the measurement of time. So I'm going to give you just a little bit of this now, okay? So the pyramid timeline is something that I read about in this book by Peter Le Mesurier, and that's probably not his real name because Le Mesurier in French means the measurer, and he's obviously measuring the Great Pyramid. So that was one of the things Graham Hancock said was, it's probably not his real name. And you can see on this book cover, this is the way my book looked when I got it in 1993. Right at the beginning, when I went down and I was just starting to buy books on the paranormal, I got 2 books. I got Monuments of Mars by Richard C. Hoagland, and I got Great Pyramid Decoded by Peter Le Mesurier at the same time. And many, if not most, of these pyramid statistics I've just been giving you are in this book. With that being said, it is extremely complex and difficult to read. It is like a PhD graduate technical geometric discussion. It does not read well. So don't blame me if you read it and you don't like it. But again, if you can get into it and if you can use it as a resource for information, it is incredibly valuable. But you can't get hung up on all the specifics. This is one of the things I learned over the years is, like if I'm reading through a scientific paper and I see some algebraic equations I don't really understand, I don't try to get all wrapped up in that. I try to get to the conceptual core of what is the discovery that these people are making. And that's what we want to do here with the Great Pyramid Decoded book. It is an encyclopedia of pyramid knowledge, and you have to really have a lot of ambition to get through it. I didn't realize the way most people saw this book when I got my hands on it, and I was entirely fascinated by the things I was reading. So here is a diagram from the book, just a pencil sketch from some of these early, this is from Piazzi Smith, of some of the pyramids that were found in Egypt, and you can see most of them are really dilapidated. They're in various stages of decay, but the Great Pyramid and its neighbors, by comparison, are quite beautiful. So this is one of the pictures from the book where you can see the Great Pyramid on the top, and you notice there is a line in the middle. That is actually what happens. There is a hollowing in of the corners, so if we go back several slides here, let me just pop back to that real quick. So this is an exaggerated view of those hollowed-in lines that you're seeing right now. So you see how there's a line in the middle of each face and that it's hollowed in? That, if the pyramid had mirror-polished casing stones on it, the theory is that someone could shine a laser beam on it from space. And the laser beam would be able to bounce between the 2 faces since they are actually tilted in a little bit like this. They're not flat like this. They're actually tilted in a little bit. You could bounce a laser beam off of this and use it to laser guide spaceships as they're coming in to the Earth for a landing. And that might be what we're seeing here. So let me now get back to where we were in the slideshow, where you can see that you actually have this image. You can see down the middle where that line is from a photograph. You have to catch it just right with the sun. But that, again, is another one of these very strange things of like, well, how did they get it so precise? And how did this come into being? Now, the King's Chamber, of course, is the area that is the most beautiful. If you go into the pyramid and you're hiking around in there, just like what Napoleon was doing, you're going to come up to this top area, and inside this beautiful cathedral-like room made of purple granite that actually has fresh air because they've got these air vents to the outside. Inside the room is this granite sarcophagus that is also made out of the same purple granite. Now, Napoleon was one of the first people to go in as an explorer and see this because his country was financing a lot of the pyramid research that was being done. And he actually did spend a night lying in the Great Pyramid sarcophagus, because it is very conveniently designed where a human body could lie down inside of it. Now, is it a tomb? Was there a mummy in it? No. This is really, really silly. The actual legend of the Great Pyramid is that there was an Egyptian priesthood with a crystal, and this comes from a variety of sources, including leaked inside information, that there were priests and priestesses in there. They would have a large crystal that they would use. You would lie down in the sarcophagus, and then you would go through an initiation experience. The pyramid initiation experience is driven by the energies of the Great Pyramid itself. And this gets into a whole other subject that I don't have time to talk about in today's show, which is the science of pyramid power. Why is it that when you build a pyramid, that it will have certain energetic properties? And in the 1970s, people were building little pyramids out of cardboard, and they were able to keep their razor blades sharper for a lot longer. And in fact, there was a Russian scientist who actually studied this under a scanning electron microscope, where he looked at the surface of a razor blade that was dull, and then he put it inside a pyramid, aligned it with magnetic north, or rotational north, either one. And then, later on, when he went back and looked at the razor blade again under the scanning electron microscope, the blade had actually become sharper. Now, what this suggests is that this energy, that first of all, it suggests there's some sort of energy coming through the pyramid. What does the word pyramid actually mean? Pyramid means fire in the middle. Well, what is the fire in the middle? It appears to be some sort of energetic fire that's happening in the king's chamber. The sarcophagus is intended for you to lie down in it and experience this fire in the middle that the pyramid causes, because it is a spiritually activating energy. So the very, very short idea of how this works, let's go over to this one again. I need to use my hands. The very short idea of how the pyramid structure works is essentially requiring a reinterpretation of gravity. And we're going to get a lot into this, some of this, in the new class, Gateway to Galactic Mind, which I hope to see you in. And I'm only going to say the exoteric things in this show. I'm not going to really get into the deep stuff here. But anyway, if you look at what's happening with the Great Pyramid and with the initiation of the Great Pyramid, the energy that the Great Pyramid apparently creates, there is a theory that explains how a simple shape like a pyramid could actually cause energy to be generated. So bear with me real quick. I'm going to give you a very quick version of this. One of the books, one of the scientific papers that really tripped me out and changed my life was a scientific paper by Dr. Oliver Crane called, and it's a big one, Central Oscillator in the Space-Time Quantum Medium. And I read this in about 1998. I printed it out, and when I actually cut my finger as I was leaving the house, I accidentally bled on the book. So there's some of my blood is still on the book cover, the book that I had printed off of the printer. And that made me feel like, well, that book's important because my blood ended up falling on it in this very crazy event in my life. What does this Central Oscillator in Space-Time Quantum Medium paper argue? Well, what Dr. Oliver Crane did is he goes back to the Biefeld-Brown effect. And if you don't know this, this is something that apparently is getting ready to be declassified, or soon will be, as a result of what's going to happen in June. The Biefeld-Brown effect was discovered by Thomas Townsend Brown, and then his physics professor, Biefeld, helped to kind of refine the theory. But the basic idea is that if you charge up a metallic plate with a very, very high electrical charge, that it will start to generate thrust and move around. So the original Thomas Brown experiment was of kind of a roundish electrical plate that's attached to an axle, and then it starts spinning around like this just by being electrically charged. It actually creates thrust. And Thomas Brown's research with the help of Professor Biefeld concluded that as electrical energy is moving from a negative pole to a positive pole, the flow of charge is negative to positive. We know this. That as you have an electrical flow from negative to positive, that you are getting a gravitational thrust. Now, this is something that conventional science doesn't give us. They haven't unified gravity and electromagnetism. The closest you get in conventional theory is where they have to add the fifth dimension. So they say, okay, there's 3 dimensions. Einstein says time is the 4th dimension. Well, then in order to make gravity unify with electromagnetism, you got to add one more. So that's Kaluza-Klein theory. So you got to add another dimension just to make gravity and electromagnetism work together. Maybe not. Maybe Kaluza-Klein theory is wrong, because Dr. Oliver Crane's model shows that the charge flow is also a gravitational flow. In other words, the flow of electricity creates a gravitational flow. They are both the same field, actually, in just different forms, and one works with the other. Normally, the type of electrostatic charges that we're using are much too weak to cause this effect to occur. But if you actually go back to the late 1990s, there were many people doing these experiments where they make little foil triangles of like an aluminum foil, and they have very fine wires on them. And then they simply run a large amount of electricity through this tiny little foil triangle, and the triangle lifts off the ground and levitates. That's proof that this works. The only reason that conventional science really couldn't have done anything with this then is that you need an enormous amount of energy to actually make the levitation, the anti-gravity happen. And so you would need some kind of power system that's better than anything we have now for this particular type of anti-gravity to actually function. And then, of course, the power system has to weigh less than the craft, so that it has to have a low enough center of gravity that you can generate enough power to overcome its gravity. But here's where Dr. Oliver Crane in this paper really blew me away, is he said, look, if gravity is flowing from negative to positive electrical charge, then that's the same thing that we see in the atom, isn't it? Because atoms have electrical charge, don't they? Do you remember what it is? What are the electrons charged with? They're negatively charged. What is the nucleus charged with? Positive charge. Protons in the nucleus are positively charged. Electrons are negatively charged. So Dr. Oliver Crane is the first person I'm aware of in the open source literature to speculate that the flow of charge inside the atom is also a gravitational flow. And therefore, this idea would be that the atom itself is the result of a flow. It is a vortex. It is a vortex in space. And the negative to positive charge is also not only an electrical flow, it's a gravitational flow. What do you get to do if you have that basic model? What we see then is the idea that the negative charge is flowing towards the positive, the electrons are flowing towards the nucleus. Let's blow up that atom now to the size of the Earth. We don't want to literally blow it up because you get a nuclear explosion. But let's just expand the size of the atom to the size of the Earth. The gravity is flowing towards the center of the Earth. So Dr. Oliver Crane said, the Earth is just made up of a lot of atoms, and so the gravitational flow is going negative to positive from the outside to the in, because we see it's the charge flow is the same as gravitational flow. Negative to positive is a gravitational push. So then he says, what if the whole Earth is actually, the gravity is flowing into the Earth from the outside? And this explains the mystery of the space-time fabric, because remember, Einstein tried to say Earth is like something sitting on a sheet and it's weighing the sheet down. But that sheet only works for like the top half. The bottom half is on the bottom of the sheet. And things don't just roll into the Earth. It's flowing into the Earth equally from all sides. So what Dr. Oliver Crane ultimately concluded is that atoms are being powered and manufactured by gravity. The electrical charge might even be some kind of after effect of this gravitational flow. So if each atom is made of gravitational flow, then when you have an Earth that's made up of a whole bunch of atoms, you have a much larger gravitational flow going in. So gravity is what's flowing into the Earth to create the Earth moment by moment. Now, if you can follow me this far, the next thing that I would want you to see is that it is like a fluid-like energy. It actually has fluid-like characteristics. So as the Earth is doing all this stuff, as the gravity is flowing into the Earth, it's also going to be spinning along the way. There is a rotational aspect to this energy that flows into the earth to make the earth. And we can see this, for example, with the Coriolis effect. If you fire a cannonball in the northern hemisphere, it's going to bend in one direction. If you fire off a cannonball in the southern hemisphere, it bends in the opposite direction. And this is also supposedly why water flows down a drain differently in Australia than it does in America. So, of course, being a science nerd, when I landed in Auckland, New Zealand for my Australia tour that I did back in 2012, first thing I did is flush the toilet in my hotel in New Zealand. And sure enough, the water was going in the opposite direction. That was very amusing, to say the least. So the Coriolis effect shows that gravity is spinning as it goes into the earth. To some degree, we know that's happening. Now, if you build a pyramid, and all of this energy is flowing into the pyramid to build the pyramid moment by moment, and it's a fluid-like energy, as it flows into the pyramid, it's actually the same as if you're dumping water into a funnel upside down. Just imagine the pyramid's upside down, okay? So if you're pouring water into this upside down pyramid, and then you put a hole at the bottom where the capstone is, and the pyramid's a funnel now, and you pour all this water into the pyramid, what will naturally happen to the water? The water will naturally start spinning. That's what it's going to do. It's going to flow through the hole on the bottom, and it's going to create this vortex. That is exactly what's happening inside the pyramid by the simple fact that it's sitting there and it exists. And this is why, if you've watched some of my other videos, when the Russians rebuilt pyramids out of PVC pipe and fiberglass facing, they found that the pyramids were doing amazing, amazing things. The pyramids, for example, were deflecting severe weather. A severe weather storm coming into the area where the pyramid was built, and these were sometimes, over 100 feet tall, steep pyramids. They built them very sharp angles like this, not the normal Giza angle like this, but more like a steep angle like that, okay? Like an obelisk almost. Those Russian pyramids did all kinds of amazing stuff. They deflected severe weather. They appeared to be reducing the amount of earthquake activity inside the earth in that area. They would purify oil wells, so you get better oil. They would purify water. They actually built one of these pyramids over a radioactive aquifer near Chernobyl, where the water was totally contaminated with radiation. And in a short time after they built the pyramid there, the water was clean. They also found that when you'd build a pyramid in a particular area, that a lot more rainfall would start to happen, and you get exotic vegetation that was growing. One of the strangest effects of these Russian pyramids was that they got extinct versions of ferns growing out of the ground in the area where the pyramid was built. As if this energy is somehow informing biology and calling something up out of like a genetic DNA record, where existing plants most likely were molecularly reconfigured to older plants. And that's another thing. The molecular reconfiguration by energy is another thing I'm going to go over once again in Gateway to Galactic Mind. So I'm just giving you an overview of some very strange things. The craziest stuff, however, is what happens to people and to biological life with the pyramid power. One of the things they did is they took slabs of granite from the pyramid and they built selected jail cells out of them in Russia. And those prisoners that were living inside the pyramid rocks with the pyramid energy in them were much nicer. They got along with everybody better. They would discuss things instead of fighting. They were less violent. They got off of alcohol, hard drugs. They rehabilitated. All this amazing stuff happened, and there was no change except that they got the pyramid rocks in their jail cells. I mean, a granite jail cell is pretty freaking awesome. If you're going to get arrested, I guess you should do it in Russia. I'm just saying, that's just an aside. Anyway, what we're looking at is that when they took water and stored it inside, this is the craziest one, folks, so just buckle your seatbelt for this. When they took water and they stored it inside the pyramid, and they gave 1 milliliter, ml, a little tiny milliliter, when they gave 1 milliliter of water from the pyramid that had been stored in it for a few days, and this is a Russian pyramid, this is not the Great Pyramid, just one of these Russian PVC pyramids. They gave it to a prematurely born baby that was written off for dead because it was too young, and conventional medical science says, well, this baby's gone. And they gave those babies pyramid water. They lived. All of them lived. If you give pyramid water to somebody with cancer, they have a massive decrease in cancerous tumors. If you give it to somebody with diabetes, apparently it cures diabetes. It cures everything. Anything that could go wrong with the human body, if you give the human body pyramid energy or any type of lab animals, a rat, whatever, they get over this. And so the pyramid seems to have an amazing benefit on mental health, like the pyramid study with the prisoners. There's also studies where they took trapezoidal rooms. They put schizophrenics and people with mental illness in the mental hospital. They gave them a trapezoidal room where the walls taper in like this and it's flat on the top, kind of making it like a pyramid. And they end up doing a lot better that way. Also, the work of R.D. Laing on schizophrenia shows that if you take schizophrenics and have them go outside, walk around in nature, put their hands in the soil, do some planting and some gardening, that most, if not almost all, of their schizophrenic symptoms disappear. And this, again, is related to this natural energy from the earth. So the reason my first book is called Source Field Investigations is that there was a reason for me to come up with a new name for this energy, and I called it the source field. The Russians typically call it torsion fields, and source and torsion kind of rhyme, so I liked that. But when you're looking at something that's a lot more than just gravity now, you have to give it a new name. It's the source of consciousness. It's the source of vitality for biological life. Some of the Russian studies actually showed that up to 50% of the energy that makes plants alive is coming from this background energy that is associated with gravity. It's the source of everything that we have. Space, time, matter, energy, consciousness, it's all part of this source field. It's created by the source field. So the really cool trick is that you can actually build a machine with no moving parts that nonetheless works like an engine and gets the source field to spin and rotate. And when you concentrate it in a given area, and you get a lot more of it in one area, you get increases in consciousness, increases in biological health, and you get people becoming a lot nicer and more spiritually integrated, okay? And we already know that from the Russian studies. But now I'm going to drop it on you, okay? What if you take that same pyramid energy that we already have seen from the Russian studies does all this amazing stuff, and you concentrate it really strongly into one part in the middle of the pyramid. And you make that a room. And then in that room, you build a sarcophagus, which is like a tuned resonating chamber for the human body to lie down inside of it. Well, wouldn't you get like, okay, theoretically, and I'm not saying that we absolutely are going to claim this, because then people say, you know, quack science or whatever, but the Russians allege that it cures cancer. They allege that it cures other diseases. If you go into that sarcophagus, don't you think you'd get a big health blast? Don't you think it would turn your health around? And if those prisoners are becoming a lot nicer and more spiritually integrated, is the pyramid designed for this? Is the pyramid designed to actually spring-load you to the higher level of your own spiritual growth? Well, that apparently is what it was built for. It apparently was built for a human being to lie down inside the sarcophagus, to spend a night inside the pyramid with the help of these tuned healers who have crystals. And then you go through an initiation experience. Now, initiation is incredibly terrifying. In the original Freemason lodges, they would, just to get into the lodge, you have to have a bandage put across your face. Let's go to this one. You have to have a bandage across your face, and then they tie up your pants, so you got one pant leg that goes up to here. You have to open up your shirt, and then originally they took a rapier, they took the kind of sword that you use in sword fighting, and they put it right against your heart. In modern times, I've heard that they actually pull a gun on you, okay, and they hold a gun on you. Not the greatest thing, but the idea is with the sword against your heart, it is the fear that creates the initiation, and then when you realize they're not going to kill you, you have this kind of rebirth experience, and that's not very nice, okay, let's be honest, but it mirrors what happens in many of these shamanic traditions as well. If you want to become a shaman, if you want to have shamanic powers, typically there is some type of shamanic injury that initiates all that. You have a shamanic injury that could be, or sometimes it was even done deliberately. People would, for example, put spikes through underneath their muscles and then hang themselves for the shamanic initiation. There's a Inuit native shamanism up in Alaska where they would actually chop at their legs with an axe. Please don't do this, okay? Please don't do this. Modern initiation is just being alive on Earth, so you don't need to do anything crazy. But the point is, in the past, these shamanic injuries would activate your spiritual self. There's a lot of different techniques that people were using like this. But in what we're talking about today, the pyramid itself was designed to put you through initiation. So what does that mean? That means that as you're lying there in state in the pyramid, well, you're not really in state because that means you're dead. But as you're lying there in the pyramid, you kind of go into a death-like state. And you experience a full, discontinuous trip to the afterlife. Much like the idea if you took way, way too much in terms of any type of psychedelic drug, which I don't recommend, but that's when people start to have these discontinuous experiences where you're not aware of the room, you're not aware of your physical body anymore, you are transmigrated to some different place that appears to be some address in some domain in the spiritual world. You go into a domain that has its own address, and it's real, and you experience things in this domain that are accurate, and then you're able to come back after the psychedelics wear off and bring something back with you from that domain. Apparently, the Great Pyramid's granite sarcophagus does this. It has this same type of consciousness discontinuous effect where you get launched into another domain. Okay, well, yeah, David, that sounds really freaking fun. I want to do it. I want to do it. No, you don't. And the reason why you don't want to do it is that when you go into that domain, it is a horror movie. What do I mean by horror movie? I mean that you are faced with the exact nature of all of the karma that you've created in this life. So there's different ways to deal with your karma. You can deal with it in the conventional way, of nice and slow, one step at a time, and you burn off a little karma, you burn off a little karma. Or apparently with this pyramid initiation, you can go in there and you can burn off all of your karma at once. In order to do this, you have to go through an extremely, extremely horrific process, which is essentially like getting stuck in a nightmare that never ends, or it doesn't seem to end, and you are faced with all of the things that you did to hurt others. You have to re-experience it. It's sort of like the idea of the life review in the afterlife, but you're doing it while you're still alive. You review everything that happened. You review all the karma that you created. You have monsters chasing after you. You probably have shamanic death. You have a very visceral experience. If you've studied shamanism, people have these visionary experiences where they're eaten alive by animals, where their bodies are ripped apart or cut apart, and your body's completely disintegrated. So it's very, very nasty. You would be given extensive preparation before you did this as to what to expect, how difficult it's going to be, and only the bravest and perhaps the most foolish people would do this. However, if you do it successfully, if you burn off all the karma in this horrific nightmare, then what happens is that you come out with ascended abilities. And this is one of the really interesting things, because the Edgar Cayce reading said that a intuitively derived book called the Aquarian Gospel of Jesus Christ was real. So follow me, right? Edgar Cayce had 14,000 medical readings. You're sitting there in your house on a given day, and that's all he knows is that you're there, but he diagnoses your medical problems and he prescribes treatment that works, that nobody else had thought of. And it's usually, he's going to talk about a mind-body-spirit connection to your ailment, where it's a spiritual problem that's actually affecting you physically. The Edgar Cayce readings also said that this book called the Aquarian Gospel of Jesus Christ was authentic and true, that the information in it was actually genuinely derived from higher level consciousness. This book makes the argument that Jesus actually completed his ascension inside the Great Pyramid, that he may have been the only one, we don't really know, he may have been the only one to ever actually use this technology for what it was designed for. So when you hear about the 3 missing years of Jesus and all this stuff, apparently, according to the Aquarian Gospel of Jesus the Christ, he went to the Great Pyramid, he participated in this process, they initiated him, it worked, and this is when he was then ready to ride into Jerusalem on a donkey and show that he was the prophetic messianic reincarnation. Now, he didn't say it. He said, I am the Son of Man. But obviously, riding into Jerusalem on a donkey, which nobody would normally do, they'd use a camel or a horse. That was the fulfillment of the prophecy. So, if they had horses then, I'm not even sure if they had horses in Jerusalem at the time, but it definitely would have had camels. So the donkey thing is a very particular thing that he did to show that he was this prophecy realized. So Jesus may have been the only one who was actually able to use this technology. And in this new class that you're going to be enjoying with me, Gateway to Galactic Mind, we're going to start in 2 weeks on Sunday. It's going to be 5 Sundays in a row. All kinds of great material. We're going to go through the astonishing connections between Jesus and the Great Pyramid. And they are extensive. And what I will be arguing in this class is something we all, anybody who really has been supportive of Christianity really should see this, because it appears from material like the Law of One series, and actually just an academic study of the Great Pyramid, that the Great Pyramid's measurements didn't just have that encoding of the earth, but they have the encoding of Jesus. They have the encoding of when Jesus is born, when he ascends, and the fallout thereafter. There is a timeline in the passages of the Great Pyramid, I'm not going to go into it in today's video, where 1 pyramid inch equals 1 year. And so in the previous Ascension Mystery School class, I went through all of that, and I also give a very exhaustive view of it over here in Awakening in the Dream. So there's a whole chapter in this book that is all about the pyramid timeline. So you don't have to take my conference to learn this information, but it's so much more complex than I could do in one video that I would prefer to just have you read the book. It's not very expensive, and that will help you to really understand this pyramid timeline. But anyway, what I want to talk about first of all is what actually happened to Napoleon. And I dropped my clicker here. What actually happened to Napoleon when he went into the pyramid? So back to the slide now. Here he was with all the Egyptians, and they had told him about, well, if you stay in the sarcophagus, you will turn into a god. Well, I want to do that because I think I already am a god. So Napoleon spent 1 night in the Great Pyramid, and then he drew this line art image, or I think he'd probably already sketched the image, and then what he did is he wrote over it after he'd been in the pyramid. So it's all in French and obviously cursive writing, but if you read all this, what you're seeing is Napoleon's recounting of what happened when he spent 1 night in the king's chamber in the Great Pyramid. 1 night in the king's chamber in the Great Pyramid. Somebody said close-up of the book, please. Okay, we can do that. So let's go to this one. What are we, 2? Yeah. So this is Awakening in the Dream. And that's just from the comments. One of you guys asked me to show a close-up of the book. And I know it's out of focus in the background. So if you go to, let's see, where is it? So there's a chapter here called, there's a couple of them. There's a chapter called The Pyramid Timeline. I'll just open up to that. You can see it right there. I don't know if you can, that's probably not really that visible. But it's chapter 19, Pyramid Timelines, page 351. There's a few chapters on this. So again, here it is. Let me stick it back on the table here. So what are we dealing with this pyramid timeline? Well, it very, very strongly flags the time of Jesus as being the most important period of human evolution. So when Napoleon stayed in the Great Pyramid, though, he had a very terrifying experience. So in this handwritten document that we're seeing here, what did he end up saying? He said that he had nightmare after nightmare after nightmare the entire time that he was in there. He'd never had such an evil experience in his life. He couldn't sleep. He was terrified the entire night, and he ran screaming out in the morning and said he will never go into that room again, and he never did because he was so terrified. So that's what this energy is supposed to do to you, folks. That's what this energy is supposed to do to you. It's supposed to push you through initiation. It's supposed to get you to face your karma. And the design of the pyramid is like a passive engine. It actually is creating a spinning fire in the middle, pyramid means fire in the middle, right? There's a spinning energy when Napoleon went in there, because his soul was impure, he could not handle that higher energy, because this is ultimately a loving, conscious energy. It is actually the energy of Christ. You could call it the Holy Spirit. This is what the universe is made of. There's different names for it, but it exists. And its fundamental basis is love. So when you're bombarded with this loving energy that is of a much higher frequency, okay, you actually get a consciousness effect from it. And that effect is very profound. So now what we're going to see here in the next slide is an image from Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly Palmer Hall. Or actually, I think this one was a picture from Secret Teachings of All Ages, but this is in Secrets of the Great Pyramid by Peter Tompkins. Anyway, what you're seeing here is the original idea of how this was done with the sarcophagus. Now note, the sarcophagus is actually incorrectly drawn. It is a square. It doesn't have rounded edges like what you're seeing in this image. But the basic idea is here that you have the Egyptian priests. They're wearing really cool headdresses. You know, we could probably sell those on the website. I'm just thinking about this out loud, but that might be fun. We could 3D print them, you know. We'll get a gold 3D printer, print them out of gold. Anyway, they're holding their space. You don't really see the crystals here, but apparently they had crystals involved. And then you're lying in the sarcophagus, and notice that the Ka, or spirit body, is now rising out of the person. They have the silver cord, and you see him with wings. So this again is the Egyptian mythology of going into your spiritual body. So I do want to actually show you a couple of these things regarding how all of this works with your own initiation and how the pyramid is connected to Christianity. Because one of the biggest failings, if there was a failing of this book, Awakening the Dream, was simply that I didn't have enough space to show you the pictures. So I want to show you one of these pictures so that you can kind of get a sense of some of the weird connections between the pyramid and Jesus. That, again, it supports the idea that the pyramid was originally built as a prophecy of the coming Christ, and it's only negative forces that reappropriated the pyramid to make it into something that we now associate with, oh, it's the Illuminati, oh, it's bad, it's evil. No, look, the pyramid was not only built to prophesize the coming Christ, it was built to activate his mission and ensure that it worked. So when we read the Law of One, we have a source that claims that it was the extraterrestrial group that designed the pyramid, that built it, you know, out of what they call everlasting rock. That's another interesting thing we'll go into in Gateway to Galactic Mind, my upcoming conference. But some of these things that I talk about in the book, the connection between the pyramid and Christianity, you really have to see it to understand it. So I want to show you a couple of these images before we end today's session. So check this one out. The reflection of the pyramid creates a cross shape at the summer solstice, but only because of the casing stones. So check this out. A lot of the Christian scholars have really gotten into this. So first of all, let's look at the bottom. Now remember, the casing stones are mirror polished, they are gleaming white, they reflect the sunlight, right? So in the beginning, if you were in a spaceship and you were looking down at the pyramid, you would see these reflections that would show up as white light on the surface of the sand around the pyramid. You follow me? So here we are in the summer solstice, and you will notice that if you were hanging out over the pyramid while the casing stones were there, it is a very precise crucifix. It's not absolutely perfect, but it's surprisingly close. And then, going back to the previous slide, what gets even more exciting is that as you go from December 2nd and 3rd, which is, again, you know, the winter solstice, I believe. So yeah, when you travel from the winter solstice to the summer solstice, December 2nd and 3rd, and then you go through February 27th, 28th, notice that, okay, I need a big one here. Notice that the shape is like a man on the cross, okay? You have the arms on the cross before it turns into the crucifix. So, and then, of course, Jesus' birth is around the time of the winter solstice, right? And then the crucifixion, right? And the crucifixion comes to fruition around Easter, which is theoretically symbolized by the summer solstice, where he ascends and becomes Christ, and it turns into the crucifix. So let's go back to the slide again. So we are literally seeing the image of a man on the cross here. with his arms held up on the cross, and then it transforms into the crucifix during the exact period of time between Jesus' birth and Jesus' ascension. That in and of itself, some people, I don't believe that. David, you're reaching. Well, just bear in mind, I'm not the first one to talk about this. Many scholars, many scholars have talked about this. This is nothing new, and it's been in many books. But that's not all. There's a lot of other interesting evidence. So check this next one out. If you actually take the slope angle of the pyramid, meaning the angle of its actual slope angle, and then you take the latitude line through the pyramid, and you draw that angle. This is the slope angle, by the way. It's the angle of the inner passageways. This is not the actual surface of the pyramid on the outside. This is the angle of the inner passageways of the pyramid. Okay, that's 26.3 degrees. So if you take a straight latitude line and you put it through the Great Pyramid, so that's straight east to west, and then you take the angle of the inner passageways and you draw it up from the pyramid and you go east, it directly, without any mathematical fudge factor whatsoever, it directly crosses through Bethlehem. That line bifurcates Bethlehem. And it also crosses the River Jordan, as we saw in the biblical Exodus. The parting of the crossing of the River Jordan is a major part of the Exodus story. So it's interesting because all of these things are like historically related to Jesus, right? The Exodus is what paved the way. The Old Testament paved the way for the New Testament. You have it cross directly through Bethlehem. And again, people are like, oh, you're reaching. This is a coincidence. But this is exactly what we would expect if benevolent ETs built the pyramid to prophesize the coming Christ. It makes the crucifix on the ground. It starts out as the crucified man. And then over the months, it evens out, becomes a crucifix, and then the slope angle inside, with no mathematical fudge factor, you just draw that angle off of the east-west line, and it goes right through Bethlehem and crosses the river. Very peculiar. Now, we have another culture that was building pyramids at the same time in Mesoamerica, and you might not have seen this either, but this is extremely bizarre. So we're saying the pyramid could be a prophecy of the coming Christ, but then when we look at what's actually happening in Mesoamerica, we have Yakatecutli. And Yakatecutli is unbelievably similar to Jesus. And this is another thing that these ancient scholars had figured out. Here I'll read the subheading. Yakatecutli, Aztec pre-conquest lord of the vanguard. His name presumably signifies he who leads the way, just like Jesus, right? And he's got a beard, and it says that he had white skin, I guess, because there's a lot of that kind of stuff. The many legends of what they called Pahana, the white brother, and then the people came back as conquerors and took advantage of this. It was very sad because they thought they were seeing gods, but they were actually horrible people in this case. But originally they weren't. So it says, he was the god of the wandering vendors and missionaries known as the Potecas. So is this absolute proof that the pyramid building culture in Mesoamerica was prophesizing Jesus or some type of Jesus-like being the same way that happened in Egypt? It's not absolute proof, but it's pretty freaking weird because he's got a cross, he's crucified, he's got the beard, and it is he who leads the way. Right? So that's very interesting, and most people have never heard of this. So another thing that's really interesting is that the passageways of the Great Pyramid themselves reveal a stylized image of the hero. This is another thing I talked about in the book that I don't think is very easy to visualize. Okay? If you look at the passageways from the side angle, then what do you see here? What you see here, and I think I can get my mouse in there and you'll be able to see this. The King's Chamber up at the top represents like the head of a body. The Queen's Chamber would represent something like a heart. The grotto would represent the masculine organs, as you see here. And then on the bottom where the pit is would be the feet. And then you have a vertical line that represents all the passageways. So I don't want to cut away from this. I want you to keep looking at this real quick. So what we're looking at here is a stylized image of a man where the king's chamber is his head, the queen's chamber is his heart, the grotto is his root chakra, and the pit is his feet when seen from the side. But also notice that he is the king of kings. The king's chamber has the crown, all these layers of chambers above it. So it appears that what the pyramid is doing is it's encoding a stick figure of the hero, which the pyramid, remember, prophesizes the coming Christ. So this king with the crown is a stick figure representation of the coming Christ, but it's also the galactic mind. It's the logos that's awakening in all of us, right? So it's not just one person. Jesus, as I said last time, in John 14:12 said, as I do these things, and he's talking about walking on water, changing water into wine, spitting on somebody's eyes and curing their blindness, raising Lazarus from the dead. He did a lot of amazing stuff. As I do these things, he said, so shall you do them, and greater things. For I go unto my Father, which is again the cosmic consciousness. So we actually have a stylized image of the hero. Another thing I talk about in the book that I didn't really have enough visual support for, I want you to read the book so you learn the whole timeline. I'm not going to do it all now, but I want you to see how the timeline was fixed. So the starting year of the timeline is aligned with the pole star and the Pleiades. And this is again from these pyramid books. So you have to wait for a moment where the pole star, which again is the star that never moves in the night sky, it's the North Star, it always stays in one place. All the other stars rotate around it in circles. My wife and I, a couple weeks ago, found our own North Star as we were sitting out on the back porch looking out at the stars. Thankfully, we're in an area where you can actually see the stars now, unlike when we were in Los Angeles. So you got to have the pole star, and it has to shine down through the descending passage all the way down into the pit at the bottom. So you see that black line that goes down below the surface of the pyramid, and there's a room down there. That's where the feet are, as we just showed you. And then it's on top. It actually has to bore through solid bedrock. So that, by the way, that descending passageway deviates by less than 1/4 of an inch all the way down, and the only way you could do that in modern times is with laser-controlled drilling, and it's bored through bedrock. So obviously, if they've already bored through bedrock and we can see that, there could be a lot more of this bedrock that was carved out into underground tunnels all underneath the Giza Plateau, as many researchers have reported, and apparently there were sonic readings showing these tunnels, but they've never really been released. So if you've already seen them bore through this bedrock to make the descending passage, then clearly it could be done elsewhere. So now I want you to envision the North Star shining all the way down so that you could put a bowl of water at the bottom of the pit, and you'd see the image of the North Star in the water. That means it's in perfect alignment. Then you got to have the Pleiades directly overhead. So the absolute overhead point where the Pleiades are right there, precisely at the exact center of the dome of the heavens. So that only happens once, and that's what fixates the alignment. And then inside, there's an exact set of lines called the scored lines, and that represents when you start counting by 1 pyramid inch equals 1 year. So here again, so let me just go back to that slide. The coordinates of when you start counting are set by these scored lines. The scored lines you can actually see here. There is a descending passage, so there's the descending passage again. And then what we actually find as you go down the descending passage is these lines carved into the wall. Well, those lines apparently are the marker for that alignment of 2141 BC, which is when this alignment took place. And then as you go on through the pyramid timeline from here, you have an amazing, amazing number of things where by starting at 2141 BC, start at the scored lines, count 1 inch equals 1 year, and you go all the way through this stuff, and so many things happen. The exact time that Jesus was born, the exact time that he ascended, the invention of the printing press, the invention of the telegraph, the Renaissance, the Reformation, World War I, World War II, Einstein's theory of relativity, so many things are so precisely calibrated in the pyramid timeline that the idea that this was random is impossible. You could not have so many dates that all correspond to the end. But again, the Great Pyramid also had the precession of the equinoxes across the diagonals, and the big thing, of course, is the capstone. The Great Pyramid is built symbolically with a flat top. And so there is a basic numerological system that is used for each of the numbers that we count with. So the number 5 is going to represent something completely different than the number 6. The number 5 in alleged pyramid numerology, oh, here comes my dog. The number 5, she's following you. She's not coming downstairs, though. Let's just leave her alone for now. She knows not to come down here. Anyway, the number 5 in pyramid mythology means perfection, and the number 6 means imperfection. So right now I'm going to show you the legend. If you wanted to pause this and look at this, hopefully it's good enough resolution you can read everything. It shows you what each of the different numbers means. And I'm not going to go through all this because I'm going to be 3 hours in pretty soon. 2 hours and 40 minutes in right now. I didn't want this to go beyond 3 hours. So we're going to wrap it up here. But the point is, in fact, let me go back to this one slide so you can see this really clearly. Hold on. So I want you to see the top. Yeah, here we go. All right. So look at this. Now, this is an exaggerated view of the Great Pyramid as it exists today. And again, we're seeing that all of the different measurements of the pyramid have all these interesting symbolic connections. You have the year encoded in the dimensions. You have the precession of the equinoxes encoded in the 25,826.4 pyramid inches, which again is very close to the 25,000 years. Okay, so we just talked about that. But notice that this particular version of the pyramid has a flat top. Now let's just don't worry about the fact that each face is cut in half, because again, it's almost completely imperceptible. Basically, the pyramid has how many sides? Well, let's count it. You got 4 faces, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, north, south, east, west. You got a flat bottom, so that's 5, and you got a flat top, that's 6. 6-sided object. 6 in the pyramid numerology, which is mirrored in other Egyptian sources that they talk about. The number 6 has a symbolic meaning similar to numerology. It's pyramid numerology, but it means imperfection, it means karma, it means samsara, the lack of spiritual wisdom, spiritual death, lack of understanding. So the whole pyramid has an unfinished appearance. Even though it had these casing stones on it, the capstone wasn't there. And the pyramid encodes the Earth's dimensions, right? So the pyramid, what is it actually telling us about the Earth? It suggests that the Earth is unfinished. It suggests that the Earth is a work in progress. And it suggests that the arrival of the capstone symbolizes the perfection of the Earth, just as it would perfect the pyramid. You put the capstone on the pyramid, now the pyramid's perfect. It's like the Earth is getting its own capstone. Looking at this image again, what would happen to the number of sides of the pyramid if you eliminated the top by making it just a point? Well, okay, now we have the bottom is 1, the 4 sides are 4 more, so you have 5. Do you have a 6 on the top anymore? No, you don't. You lose the top. You now have a 5-sided object. So the pyramid tells you that there's going to be a journey in the Earth. The Earth is unfinished. The Earth hasn't been completed. It doesn't have its capstone. There's going to be a journey from the unfinished Earth spiritually to the finished Earth. That's the arrival of the capstone. What does the number 5 again mean in numerology in the pyramid? It means perfection. So the Earth is perfected. And the Bible has a lot of really interesting things in it, including this very weird code phrase about Jesus, where it says, the stone the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. And that's in reference to Jesus, right? Okay, a cornerstone normally is in one of the four sides of a building, and it would have the date on it, and it might have a time capsule in it, so if you dig it out, you'll find relics from the time the building was built. That's typically done. You might see one that says 1917. If you're walking around in the city and they had a building back from 1917, you look at the corner of the building, you'll see a stone that's not brick, it's cement usually, and it'll have the date carved in it. That's called a cornerstone, okay? Every normal building has four corners, right? So there is no such thing as a chief cornerstone, and everybody would know that. Cornerstones are on all four sides. That's the definition of a cornerstone. It's a stone on the corner. How the hell do you get a chief cornerstone? There's only one way to do that. It's a cornerstone that's on the top. The stone the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. The stone you put on the top, the capstone, that represents Jesus, but it also represents the fulfillment of this hero's journey, Christ path, which again happens at the end of the 25,000-year cycle. The end of the cycle, it's encoded in 23 different ancient mythologies that there's going to be some kind of a solar flash, and this whole thing, the diagonals, remember, looking at this once again, we have exactly 25,826.4 pyramid inches, which corresponds so beautifully to this wobble in the Earth's axis. So, this is a really, really fascinating line of inquiry, and it's just some of the astonishing information about the Great Pyramid, and you're going to, again, learn a lot more if you go and read my book, Awakening in the Dream, which I would highly, highly recommend that you do. Now that I've prepped you on this, now you at least have some visuals that will help you to understand a little more of what I'm talking about in the book. I do apologize that the book doesn't have as many visuals as it should. Maybe I could convince them later on to do a reissue and we could get more pictures in there. I don't know. But I wanted to show some of these to you. So, why am I talking about all of this right now? And why did I bring all of this up for you? I bring this up because the Great Pyramid is a prophecy in stone. It is a prophecy that says that the earth is now six-sided, metaphorically speaking, meaning imperfect, and that there's a lot of things we don't like going on, but that it's going to turn into the five-sided object, and the five is perfection. So we see the dimensions of the earth, we see the dimensions encoding the precession of the equinoxes, so it suggests that whatever is going to happen happens at the end of the precessional cycle, which all of the other prophecies mirror this. Now, the part where people start to get scared is when I talk about all the things that actually indicate that some type of catastrophic event may actually be coming our way. That's the kind of stuff I don't really feel like I want to talk about publicly, so I'm going to be doing it in this conference. But we are looking at the distinct possibility of Earth changes. Very, very significant, game-changing, ELE, extinction level event, Earth changes. Or it would be an extinction level event if it wasn't for the fact that the beings have told us all about this. They put the prophecies together in the Great Pyramid. They encoded the prophecies in these 23 ancient spiritual traditions, and they've come back in modern times, starting really with the Edgar Cayce readings in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And I'm also going to bring you through, in Gateway to Galactic Mind, this course we're about to do, all of these amazing 1950s extraterrestrial prophecies where the beings are contacting people in person, bringing them on board their craft, taking them for a ride, and giving them prophecies, and then developing a telepathic relationship with them where they can continue talking telepathically after these people actually got the grand tour and got the wonderful UFO ride, which for me would be just about the most exciting thing ever, to actually have that happen to me. Some people in the 1950s had this happen, and they developed a telepathic relationship with these higher beings, and that information says, it was all verified by a guy named Wilbert B. Smith, who had a security clearance with the Canadian government. But all of that information, when you combine it all together, the 1950s ETs are telling us exactly the same thing that they did in ancient times. They say that the sun is going to go through a big event. They say that the planets' orbits will change. The length of time of the orbits will change. The planets will move farther away from the sun. So the length of days for one Earth year is no longer going to be 365 days. It will be longer. They tell us that the moon might actually no longer orbit the Earth. It might actually end up becoming its own planet and get booted into another place in the solar system, perhaps, which would be kind of a nice graduation for our feminine spirit to actually become a full planet. That's one of the things they say is going to happen. And they say there's going to be a severely discontinuous change on Earth where every single aspect of our life will change. In fact, let me cut over to this right now. Just bear with me 1 second here because I want to show you this prophecy. And I know I have it in here. So, oh, I thought I did. Let's see. Okay, so anyway, I don't actually have that in there, but what we're going to do then is let's see. We'll just keep it on the global peace meditation slide then. Okay. So there is a need for there to be more stuff where I discuss this, but getting back to the 1950s prophecies, I'm going to go through all this in Gateway to Galactic Mind. You're going to see how they had a list of 100 questions, and they independently contacted, they meaning Wilbert Smith and a man named George Hunt Williamson, who wrote a series of books. He was very similar to the way I am in the 1950s, the same kind of guy, spiritual UFO researcher with multiple published books, and he became very popular. But we're going to talk about how they were able to devise a list of 100 questions that included classified information that W.B. Smith learned from his security clearance in Canada. And they found these people who said they were in contact with extraterrestrials, and a certain number of them answered all 100 questions exactly the same way. Now, in the 1950s, the beings were asked by people that were dialoguing with them telepathically, just like you see in the Law of One. These beings were asked, why don't you guys just show up right now? And they always gave the same answer. They said there are certain cycles that need to complete on a global level in order for us to appear before you and be ready for us to appear before you. There needs to be a mass awakening first. People on Earth need to see what's really going on. Even Edgar Cayce prophecies said that we would come to see the rottenness of the world in a way that we never had before. The ancient prophecies talk about this too, whether it's the Hindu prophecies, the Zoroastrian prophecies. They all talk about life on Earth getting really ugly and nasty towards the end, and that is exactly the kind of thing that is happening to us right now. So with all this being said, you are being affected by these energetic changes. And what the 1950s ETs talked about, these cycles that needed to play out, they're happening now. So another thing I'm going to be doing in this upcoming class that's about to begin is I'm going to talk about the most enigmatic, impenetrable subject I ever wrote about, which is the cycles of time. In my second book, The Synchronicity Key, I talk about how history is repeating in very, very strange ways. And we're going to go more into this in the next video that I'm going to do next Sunday. So I'm not going to talk too much about it right now. But what you're going to see, I'm going to give you some of it next week in this YouTube video, is how events and information is cyclically repeating in the world. That we are seeing historical events following a pattern. There's a plot to the way that history plays out. There's a beginning, middle, and ending to the story of each of these cycles. And what's so weird is that you'll have a series of events that take place in the past, and then it reiterates into the future, but it's exactly over the same length of years. So, for example, 2,160 years, why do they talk about this as the age of the zodiac, and what does it mean, what does it matter? Well, if you look at Roman history of the Punic Wars, and then American history, World War I, World War II, the Punic Wars and World War I and World War II happened exactly at the same points, 2,160 years apart. And then even some of the same people seem to come back. So the original Carthaginian warlord Hannibal invaded certain lands, and then Hitler invades the same lands at the same exact times, exactly 2,160 years later. And Hannibal and Hitler look very similar, except that Hitler has only this mustache and Hannibal has the full beard. But their faces are almost like, they're basically identical. And they invade the same lands with the same war strategies at the same time, and this is so precise that it's almost down to the day. And then I even found that Hannibal had, I guess, betrayed, it was either his father or his brother, I'll have to go back and look, but he murdered somebody in his own family. And it turns out that Hitler, almost down to the day, did his first big false flag, which was where the Gleiwix incident, where he pretended that the enemy was attacking his own radio station, and he blew up his own radio station, but they kind of got delayed, and so the bodies that they staged at the site, this all came out in the Nuremberg trials after World War II. The bodies had been decayed. They had to do it later than they thought, so they had planted these fake dead bodies there that were already dead. They wanted to look like they'd been shot on site. They really weren't. And all that unraveled in the Nuremberg trials. So this self-inflicted wound of Hitler happened at the exact same time that Hannibal betrayed his family, like almost down to the exact day. And maybe even the reason why Gleiwix incident was late was because of the cycles of history. There's a lot of this data that's very amazing, including where I was able to discover that 9/11 is just one of a sequence of events that, believe it or not, was playing out in Polish history 539 years before. Now, why 539? Okay, well, there's the quarter cycle of 2,160 years, and if you go to the ascensionmysteryschool.com, by the way, I would highly recommend it, because we put up a video where I'm giving you a lot more of what this course is going to contain. It's a new video. You haven't seen it before. Same kind of camera setup that we got here. It looks gorgeous. It's only 10 minutes long. So go to ascensionmysteryschool.com and watch the video, and I cover some of this stuff in the video about these cycles of time and about the 539-year cycle. Well, if you take the age of the zodiac and you chop it up into 4 pieces, 2,160 divided by 4, you could do this with your calculator, it comes out to 540. But we don't actually see a 540-year cycle in history. We do, however, see a 539-year cycle all over the place. It shows up in many, many instances. Why do you have to shave off that 1 year? Apparently, it has to do with the fact that 539 as a number is more harmonic, has more vibration in it actually than 540. And so one of the ways that you can prove this is that you take 539 and it is the product of 7 times 77. In other words, you take 7 multiplied by 77, put that in your calculator, and you get 539. Now, Jesus in the Bible has a very weird parable at one point where he says, "If thou art to forgive thy brother, thou must forgive him 7 times 77 times." It doesn't make any sense. Why in the world would you sit there and want to forgive somebody? Oh, I got to do it 539 times. I got to do it 539 times. No, this is Jesus doing the same thing that they talk about in Hamlet's Mill, where mythologies from advanced beings that know a lot more than we think they did, the mythologies have mathematical and numerical codes in them, folks. Jesus knew exactly what he was doing when he said, forgive 7 times 77 times. And what he's really talking about is that the reason these cycles repeat is that we need to forgive what happened in the previous cycle. From the afterlife perspective, the cycles are great because your soul knows what you're going to encounter in a given lifetime. You can plan out your incarnation. You can look ahead and see, okay, there's going to be a war, there's going to be an economic collapse, there's going to be all this trouble. I'm ready. I'm going to dive in. I'm going to do this. Okay? I'm going to do this lifetime because I know these things are going to happen. The cycles give us a nice structured way for all this to happen. Up until now, when you look at these cycles, there might be a different one affecting the United States that resonates back with Rome, right? So let's just take Jesus' overall idea that the cycles are related to forgiveness. Well, we see Hannibal coming back as Hitler. He didn't learn anything. He didn't learn anything. But an example of somebody who did learn something is Emperor Cato of Rome. Now, Emperor Cato of Rome reincarnated as Jimmy Carter, and they have exactly the same face, and they did exactly the same things at exactly the same time. There's very, very many parallels between Carter and Cato, including the fact that they grew up as farmers. Everybody used to knock on Carter for being a peanut farmer. Cato was a farmer. There's many, many amazing things we're going to go through in this course about the connection between Cato and Carter. And there's also an amazing connection between the Roman Emperor Scipio Africanus and Nixon. Scipio Africanus had a whole scandal
in which he was caught bribing the enemy with money so that the war would be held off to boost his chances for re-election. Okay? What did Nixon do? He was wiretapping the Democrats to try to win the election by stealing it. This all came out in Watergate. Scipio got caught bribing the enemy, basically, betraying the people. So Scipio ends up he was handed these books, these ledgers, that had all the proof of the transactions he was making, where he's sending gold coins to the enemy. And right in front of the whole Colosseum, he grabs the books and he rips them up and he walks off and he resigns. The time that Scipio Africanus resigns is exactly 2,160 years before Nixon resigns in Watergate. And it's really, really precise. I thought I would make it this long without coughing, but sometimes I cough. Anyway, we're 3 hours in. These are just some of the amazing mysteries we're going to talk more about next week in the free video and then in the online course. But before we do that, and I give a little promo, let's just use, everybody's here. We got almost 14,000 people. That's twice as many as the 7,000 we need for a good global peace meditation to reduce global war, crime, terrorism, fatalities, economic failures by 72%, as we've said before. So this technology does work. So right now I'd like to use this, and of course if you want to use these cameras and with the slider, zoom in on my face with one and slide out on the other one, we do all that fun stuff. But I don't want you really watching this. I want you to actually close your eyes and meditate. Okay. I'd like you to put both feet flat on the floor. Take a nice deep breath. And feel yourself becoming more and more deeply relaxed. Feeling all the tension easing out of your body. Feeling yourself sliding into a beautiful calm, like a beautiful meadow with lots of wild flowers of all different colors. And the flowers are bobbing and weaving in the wind. And you feel completely safe and completely at peace. Seeing people you knew before who appeared to have died, and now you find that they are very much still alive. And as you breathe more deeply, you begin to understand how the earth is moving into a zone of higher energy. And this energy is creating a condition across the entire earth that closely mirrors the conditions inside the king's chamber in the Great Pyramid of Giza. What if, thousands of years ago, you had to go into that king's chamber sarcophagus and experience that heightened energy to enjoy the benefits of ascension? And you remember how that process involves facing your deepest fears. You're lying in the sarcophagus, and you go through what appears to be a nightmare, in which very awful things are happening. Your heart is broken. You see the effect of what you've done and how it caused others to feel. You have to forgive yourself. You have to release. And you have to experience karma. You have to re-experience what you did to others as it happens to yourself. And now we are seeing that the entire earth has an energetic increase that is the same as the great pyramids sarcophagus in the king's chamber. The horrors that used to only happen in the sarcophagus initiation are now called current events, the news, lockdowns, pestilence, corruption at the highest levels, financial collapse, skullduggery, legerdemain, insider trading, betrayal, human trafficking, evil beyond the wildest imagination. It has become the dream of Earth and life on Earth that we are awakening from. As we breathe and meditate deeply, let us think about these great cycles where each country, with its own language and its own geographic isolation, used to be on different harmonic time cycles. And now I'd like you to envision how in the last year and a half, the entire world is now going through one cycle. All countries, for the first time in human history, experiencing the same story points, the same plot twists of the hero's journey. The hero's journey culminates in a dark night of the soul, a point where it appears that the hero has died. In Jesus' version of the story, it is the death on the cross. But this is not the end. As it appears at this time that we are going through our global dark night of the soul, I would encourage you to reaffirm the Earth's successful birth into this new reality without being destroyed and without tremendous loss of life. The benevolent prophecies have assured us that evil will be destroyed on earth, that fairness and freedom and justice and love will triumph, that we will have new sensitivities, new abilities, telepathy, telekinesis, bilocation, manifesting objects out of thin air, being able to fly through the air just like you're soaring like a bird. And all of this ties back with how loving you are, such that all you have to be is just slightly over 50% oriented towards service to others, which is helping, nurturing, caring, forgiving, patience for others, versus service to self, which is defined as the manipulation and control of others for the benefit of the self. I would invite you each day to realize that you may be under some sort of spiritual curriculum in which every thought and every action is weighed in terms of whether you are more service to others or service to self oriented. Think about how often in your life you can lose patience. You can have an unkind thought, which then leads to an unkind word or an unkind action towards someone else. And how easy and effortless it is to do this. A lamb does not fear being slaughtered. And so the metaphor of Jesus as the lamb suggests that it is so easy to create negative karma. The universe doesn't fight back if you do something negative. It will allow you to carry through with the action. As we survey the events here on Earth, it appears that many individuals and institutions have gotten away with murder, in some cases literally, for centuries. Nothing ever seems to happen to them. Justice never appears to be served, and wrongdoing continues. However, there is no changing the universal law of karma. No one ever gets to escape the law. And even if you can't do it in one lifetime, we have multiple incarnations in which to experience the fruits of our actions. So each time you have an option to lose patience, to not find forgiveness for someone else's idiosyncrasies, as you meditate here, just imagine that maybe you think a little bit before having that instinctive response of anger, sadness, depression, and instead find the forgiveness. Find that place in yourself where you realize that you are the one infinite creator, that you are not threatened, you are never defeated, you will always exist, you will always be conscious, and you are in an ever-progressing, ascending spiral of greater and greater spiritual advancement. The time that you spend here in third density is but a brief, fleeting microsecond of your universal evolution, and there is so much to learn, and so many new mountaintops to reach, with new views to behold once you arrive there, and new abilities that will help you achieve what it is that you desire. Each day, also remembering to love yourself, because all service to others behavior emanates from self-acceptance. Self-acceptance is the bullseye. So often, as we seek out spiritual teaching, as we look for sustenance, and we wish to find new information and greater whole, greater truths, we fail to do the simple things. We fail to pay attention to the everyday, basic spirituality, the ageless wisdom teachings of things like learning to love yourself. We can get caught in labyrinths of consciousness, focusing on information and being addicted to information, wishing for more to feed this craving hunger for intellectual satisfaction in our minds. Now, there's nothing wrong with this. But let us never forget that all along the path, as we accrue esoteric knowledge, the deepest goal we have is to overwhelm ourselves with love, to make that effort to do more than we thought we could do, to feel more love than we thought we could feel, to forgive ourselves. Because ultimately what we will learn is that the only times we get angry at someone else is when they remind us of something within ourselves that we have yet to accept, to love, to forgive, and to heal. And therefore, as we journey through self-acceptance, we are also healing those things that cause us pain when we reflect it in others. So let me give you an example. Let us say that you do not like the way you look in the mirror, as just an example. Let's say there's something about your appearance that bothers you. Perhaps then, because this lack of self-acceptance resides deeply within you, and you haven't really healed it, if you see someone else who has these types of problems with their face that you think you have, you may find yourself judging them. You may find yourself wanting to insult them, and you may even speak it out loud or put it on the internet. Why would this person with a face that may be less than optimal make you angry? If you have healed and accepted the fact that your own face could be as wrinkled as an old leather shoe, and you just let that go, because everyone ages and everyone gets wrinkles. If you can just accept that and really be able to love yourself in the mirror for the way you are, even though you may not look as young as you once did, can you then allow that love to melt away any sense of anger or disgust or judgment that may flash through your mind when you see someone else who has that appearance. Look, for example, is what we're seeing in the media now, and turning one race against another race, turning one age demographic against another demographic. And see how if one group feels that they don't have what they want, that they didn't get what they wanted, that they could then look at another group and say, well, that group has what I want. And therefore, I'm angry at them and I'm jealous of them. This divide and conquer strategy is being used all the time. And it is funny because it's so sad. None of this is necessary. As you go deeper and deeper into your meditation, I want you to really accept yourself and accept whatever it is that's going on. Because the esoteric teachings and the major religions all tell us that you must begin this way. The beginning of a true healing is in self-acceptance. It is in to what degree you can learn to love yourself and love others who remind you of the things about yourself that you may not like. And as you have learned to accept each and every aspect of your own shortcomings, let's say, then no longer are you triggered by them in others. We now see that the world has been going through cycles which were deliberately designed to create a moment of global desperation, financial loss, chaos, and war. And it is through these cycles that we now are able to be catapulted into the King's Chamber initiation. We are in the sarcophagus now, just like Napoleon. And we are having our nightmares become embodied into things that exist in the 3D hologram. It is very wise to work to ameliorate the problems that we see and to take concrete steps to make the world a better place, while also understanding that the universe is whole and sacred and pure as it is. This is the sacramental nature of all things. Everything is exactly the way it needs to be for our conscious evolution so that we can awaken within the dream and take those steps to transform the world into the beautiful homecoming that awaits us. I want you to envision this love that we are generating beaming through the planet, ameliorating the possibility of any large-scale violent events that may be planned for the near future, as we discussed in the previous show. Let us envision passing through these events with as much peace as possible. The mass awakening progresses as peacefully as possible. And let us also please remember that not everyone who is going to be arrested and put on trial is equally guilty. It is very important that our reactiveness not turn into a desire for everyone involved in this to be immediately put to death. The death penalty may be appropriate in certain cases, but in many cases it probably won't be. And we don't want to get into a genocidal mentality and see these people who were involved in this, usually against their will, as being subhuman creatures who deserve a torturous death. Let us instead see that in every case throughout human history where this has happened, people within a negative group are able to come forward to redeem themselves in the public eye by working as a whistleblower and giving supportive testimony to help the world become a better place. And this will happen again. Many people from within this group will become heroes, and they deserve clemency and amnesty in those cases. Together, we are co-creating a newer and more evolved world, and I hope to see you in the I Told You So party. For where we go one, we go all. And so it is. Woo! I had my eyes closed for a long time there. We're going to keep it under 3.5 hours. It went a little bit longer than I wanted, but I want to thank all of you for being here and for joining us on this journey. And hopefully, I want you to go on over now to ascensionmysteryschool.com, type that in, and there's another video in there that now that you've just seen this video will really blow your mind. And please, again, after you go to ascensionmysteryschool.com, if nothing else, give us your email address, because every video that I do here might be my last, and I would really love to be able to stay in touch with you by email. It's the only really reliable means I have if this deplatforming occurs. So please give us your email address.
I'm not sure they can do that at Ascension.
Oh, well, do we have dwilcock.com working?
Yeah, it's working.
Okay, so you can, I'm sorry then. In this case, please go to our website. We had to do some DNS stuff this morning, get that all working. We got it. Yeah. So the course is ascensionmysteryschool.com, but to get your email in, just go to dwilcock.com, and that way, whatever happens, we'll be able to stay in touch with you. The class is doing really, really well, better than any of the others. So thank you for the amazing interest that you've shown in this. I guess we did it right. So I hope to see you there. And again, please remember, if you've done any of my other classes, we have a nice online way where if you use the account that you had before, you put in your username and ID from whatever previous class you had, you get an automatic $111 discount. That's a third of the price slashed right off the top. So $222, which is much more competitive than any other conference you're ever going to go to. Usually they start at like $400, $450 for the whole conference. And you got to fly out there, and you got to stay in a hotel. So this way you get to have it delivered at home. We have an archive where the video is stored. You can watch it anytime you want, indefinitely. We also have a discussion forum that we've created where free speech will occur, and you'll be able to discuss these concepts week after week. And as a participant, I will be taking your comments, suggestions, questions, and dreams and implementing them into the show. So you get to have a direct effect on how the show is created. I have never done something like this before, where I've integrated all of my different years of work together into a unified view of what is going to happen to the Earth, what is going to happen to us, and most importantly, how do we prepare for this so that we get what we need out of this spring-loaded jack-in-the-box thing, boom, where something big happens, but if you play it right, you become a superhero. Yeah, the sun might have blown up in the process, but it won't affect you. That's what the ancient prophecies tell us. Anyway, I'm David Wilcock, and I want to thank you for watching here today. We love you, and we will be back next Sunday, maybe even sooner, to talk more about the harmonic cycles of history. In the meantime, please go to ascensionmysteryschool.com and sign up for the Gateway to the Galactic Mind. And I will see you there in the 10-minute video. It's got some really nice motion graphics at the beginning, some beautiful music. I think you'll really, really love it. So, and we'll see you in the Gateway to Galactic Mind. Thanks for watching.